A girl with long and white hair stood on a stone platform, one strand of hair sticking up from her head. The girl was looking at a beautiful view of a mountainous area. A white column of light suddenly appeared in the distance. It rushed into the sky. Another girl approached the blonde girl from behind. She had a dark outfit and purple hair. The girl said she was wondering what Senna was staring at so intently. The blonde-haired Senna girl turned around. Senna raised her hand and began to point her finger in the direction where a white column of light rose from the ground and rushed high into the sky. Senna was standing on a stone ledge. She pointed her finger in front of her and said that it seemed to her that two new people had come into this world. A translucent pink ribbon formed around the scene. A girl with purple hair was standing behind him. Senna's face turned red. Then she puffed out her cheeks and said with displeasure that the girl in purple had already understood this. Why was she asking such stupid questions? The girl in the purple dress put her hand to her face and started laughing. Then she said she was apologizing to Senna. She just wanted to check something out. The girl in the purple dress looked at Senna and said that she was interested in what Senna saw in them. She should tell about it. Senna raised her hand up without thinking twice. Then she said that in the first one, she feels the warm and gentle sun. Senna stretched out her hand to the sky, where a star was twinkling brightly. Then Senna put her hand on her chest and continued to say that he was also a very kind and caring person. In the next moment, Senna's face and her surroundings became very gloomy. She continued to say that in another person, she sees a terribly cold darkness, that she does not want to show her face. He is really not a good person. The girl with purple hair covered her face with her sleeve and smiled slyly. Then she said that this was what Senna was thinking. Two completely opposite souls. Senna stood in front of her partner and anxiously looked into the distance. The young dark-haired man put his hands in his pocket and smiled. He thought that April had come, and it was cherry blossom time. And he was now a high school student, and he was already looking forward to the beginning of his studies. The young man took up the straps of his backpack. His face turned red as he imagined the faces of cute girls. Then he thought that he had studies ahead, vigorous activity, and maybe even his first love. The young man was walking forward enthusiastically. He began to go out onto another street from around the corner. The guy thought that all this was waiting for him around the first corner. The next moment, the guy bumps into something and gets scared of it. The young man stopped and thought that his new school life, a romantic comedy, would begin right now. The guy decides to check with the person he encountered that everything is in perfect order. The dark-haired guy looks at the other guy and thinks that maybe he's just tying his shoelaces. The guy is squatting and shaking a little with fear. A dark-haired guy stands in the middle of the street with his arms outstretched. He thought that this was really how it was supposed to happen. A blonde guy is sitting on his knee and tying the laces on his shoes. Everything went dark in front of the dark-haired young man's eyes. He gradually began to open his eyes and think that he did not understand what had happened here. The dark-haired guy was sitting on the floor and looking at the blonde guy who was lying on the floor and thought that the last thing he remembered was going to school and the guy he bumped into. Someone told the guys that the heroes had finally woken up. The dark-haired guy raises his head and sees in front of him a large hall and a staircase that led to the throne. A man in a robe and with a crown on his head was sitting there. Several other people, in unusual outfits, were standing nearby. The man in the robe and crown had long and blonde hair, and he also had a beard and mustache. The man was looking at the dark-haired guy with a drooping look. The dark-haired guy continued to sit on the floor. He was in shock. He also thought that this old man was really a king. He did not think that he would end up in another world. The blonde guy was lying on the floor and calling for his mother. The dark-haired guy was sitting on the floor. His face became even more scared. He began to smile nervously and then said that he did not understand where he was. The man in the robe and crown said that the guys are heroes, and they are in the kingdom of the Arcana. The guy thought that, and where is this kingdom of the Arcana? The dark-haired guy's face became even more scared as soon as he heard the king's words that the heroes were ready to save their world. The guy thought that it was a call of heroes after all. There was a girl and a young man standing next to the king. The girl was wearing an unusual headdress, and she looked at the dark-haired guy with contempt. The man had a large scar on his face. He was wearing armor. Beads of sweat were running down the dark-haired guy's face. He looked away at the blonde guy and thought that this was really all real. He couldn't count on the guy with the shoelaces. The blonde guy was lying on the floor and kept calling for his mom. The dark-haired guy put his hand in his chest and bent down. At this time, he thought he would succumb to the moment. He said his name was Ichiro Yamada, and he apologized for the sudden appearance. Ichiro wanted to continue the conversation. As he was interested in learning more about this place, he interrupted the conversation because he felt someone's hand on his shoulder. It was a blonde guy who pushed Iri away and with a smile on his face began to say that he was Prince Ryuguin and he asked to remember this name. Irio's face changed. He was surprised by the blonde guy's action. Ichiro started glaring at the blonde guy who held up his hands. Ichiro thought that this guy was acting strangely, and his name was also strange, to match such a rude man. The king looked at the girl in an unusual headdress and said that Mika should tell the heroes about what was happening in their kingdom. Mika held a staff in one hand. She put her friend's hand on her chest and agreed to the king. Ichiro's face turned red with embarrassment as soon as he saw the girl. Then he thought that Mika looked like a saint. Ichiro presented the map when Mika started saying that there are mazes in their world. They have existed since time immemorial. Although they pose no threat, they recently discovered 12 new mazes. The girl went on to say that the investigation showed that they are much more complicated than the existing labyrinths, and they are growing in that form, in which they are. The forces of the heroes are more than coping with the troubles. Mika looked at Ichiro and continued to say that these mazes pose a global threat, and therefore they asked the brave heroes to conquer the mazes before it becomes too easy. Ichiro was very scared by the words he heard. Mika was standing by a large magic stone and knocked the guys down. They turned around. Then Mika started saying that this is where the guys can evaluate their statuses. The blonde guy brought his hand closer to the stone. Magical symbols began to appear around him, and a table with characteristics appeared in front of him. It indicated that he was a hero and had different abilities. Mika said that Mr. Ryuguin is really a hero. There were people standing behind the girl who opened their mouths in surprise. Ichiro looked at Ryuguin in surprise and thought that he really had strange statuses. Perhaps these cheats. Ryuguin's blonde hair was hanging down on his face. He smiled maliciously and looked in the direction where Ichiro was standing. Ryuguin touched his hair and with a malicious smile began to say that Ichiro should also assess his status as soon as possible. Ichiro glared at Ryuguin and thought that this guy was in a hurry just because he had a cool status himself. After thinking a little, Ichiro's face changed. He opened his eyes wide as an idea came to his mind. Ichiro looked at the glowing magic stone that hung above the unusual and round table and thought that if Ryuguin was a hero, then who would he be? Ichiro walked up to the magic stone and put his hand on it. Magical symbols began to appear around Ichiro. Ichiro thought he had some kind of bad feeling. Ichiro's face changed. He was in a panic. A table with characteristics appeared in front of Ichiro. He was a holy knight. Po thought that he wasn't a hero after all. Mika said that Mr. Ichiro is a holy knight. Mika raised her staff and said that despite belonging to different classes, the guys have amazing statuses. People should praise and congratulate those who will save their country. The people behind Mika started cheering and shouting. Ichiro looked suspiciously to the side and thought that people were really so excited. But was everything really okay here? Then Mika called the guys. Mika came up to Ichiro and said that she really asked the guys to save the world. Ichiro looked at Mika in surprise. Then Ichiro's face changed. Sweat flowed down his face, and his eyebrows furrowed. He thought that as he came to life, he could not give an immediate answer. Ichiro looked in front of him and saw how Mika joined her hands together. A man in armor and a man in a saint's outfit stood next to her. Ichiro thought they didn't know anything about this world, and they were just high school students. Ichiro was thinking about saving this world when Ryuguin appeared in front of him. He said with a smile on his face that people had nothing to worry about. He and Ichiro would take care of everything. Ichiro stared at Ryuguin in panic and anger. Ryuguin raised his hand up, and with a smile on his face, began to say that it would not be difficult for him, the hero and the holy knight Ichiro, to conquer the labyrinths. People shouted that this was exactly what they expected from the heroes. Ichiro thought that Ryuguin was not telling some nonsense. Ryuguin began to straighten his hair, and then said that there was no doubt about it. Ryuguin shouted that they must save this world. The crowd rejoiced and praised the heroes. Ichiro stood aside. He was scared and thought that maybe this topic should have been discussed with him. 3 whole days have passed. Clouds floated in the bright sky. The lush crowns of the trees rustled their leaves. The sounds of fighting and training were heard in vain. Ichiro was wearing a dark suit with armor over it. A man in a knight's suit with a scar on his face attacked Ichiro. Ichiro's face was bruised and his sword fell out of his hands. A table appeared above the blond man. He was the captain of knights named Ragna Gladius. Ragna said with a smile on his face that Ichiro probably wasn't feeling very well. A Ragna's sword was pointed at Ichiro's face. Ichiro's teeth were clenched with anger. He thought that in order to pass the labyrinths, a knightly order had taken up his training. Ichiro got up from the ground. He began to wipe his wounded face and said that he would like to fight again. The king looked at Ichiro with contempt when he asked if they could return to their world. Then the king closed his eyes and said that in the annals it was being prepared that they could return back. Ichiro said he wanted to come back. Ichiro said he wanted to come back. Ichiro leaned his hand against his chest. Then he frowned and started shouting that he had never practiced martial arts, much less fought with anyone. He also does not have the abilities of a hero. He is superfluous here. Ichiro pointed to the side where Luguin was standing and said that if Luguin was a hero, then he could save their world alone. Luguin stood to the side. He folded his arms under his chest and looked at Ichiro in surprise. Luguin stood aside and was holy with happiness. The king closed his eyes and said that he was sorry, but they had used up all the remaining magic to bring the guys here. It would take 20 years to restore it. Ichiro was in a panic. Ichiro's face showed sadness. He stood silently. Ichiro thought that this was the same as not being able to return at all. His loved ones were worried if he stayed for another 20 years, whether his grandparents would still be alive. The king looked sadly in front of him and began to say that he had already said this before, that there was no other way. During the passage of the mazes, the guys would find various treasures, one of which was the wishing stone. There was joy on Ichiro's face, and he said that this stone could end up in his hands. The king smiled and said that then the guys would be able to go back at the time of their call. Lush clouds floated above the lush treetops. Ichiro thought that at that moment he had an incentive to go through the mazes. Ichiro was wearing armor, and there were abrasions on his face. Ichiro told the captain that he hadn't seen Luguin for a long time. The captain looked at Ichiro and said that Luguin was unwell, but he could be understood, because he suddenly found himself in an unfamiliar place. Ichiro drooped and thought that Luguin was 100% shirking classes. Ichiro thought that something was bothering him. After a while, Luguin walked along a wide corridor with large windows, through which light filtered into the corridor. Then, someone started calling Luguin's name. It was Ichiro. He said that he and Luguin hadn't seen how he was feeling for a long time. Luguin put his hand to his face and thought about something. The next moment, Luguin had an idea and suddenly started coughing. Ichiro looked at Luguin in surprise. Luguin blushed. He put his hand to his forehead and said that he was still shivering. Coughing did not go away, and fever symptoms appeared. Ichiro began to pull his hand towards Luguin's head. Ichiro said that he could check his condition. Luguin's face changed. Luguin waved Ichiro's hand away and viciously shouted that Ichiro should not touch him. Did he doubt his words? He was actually a hero. Luguin started to leave. Ichiro shouted after him that he did not doubt Luguin's words and asked for forgiveness. Why merge like that? A few leaves were flying in the air. Ichiro thought that the hero annoyed him, but he did not have time to worry at all. In just a month, they would go to the maze. Ichiro had cancer on his face. He got up from his knees and thought that he had little time. He did not want to die in the maze, so he was training hard. For this, he was ready to sacrifice his sleep. Ichiro got to his feet and took a fighting stance. Then he held his sword in front of him and shouted that the captain should fight him again. That's how Ichiro trained for 15 hours a day. 2 weeks later, Ichiro struck the captain and left a wound on his face. Ichiro Doom thought that he could not do with training alone, so he began to study the peculiarities of this world. He read books between workouts for 7 hours a day. Night fell, and the stars appeared in the sky. Ichiro was lying on the ground with bruises under his eyes. Ichiro thought that in this world there were also 24 hours in a day. He had only 2 hours left to sleep. Mika loomed over Ichiro, using her staff. Ichiro thought that every time he was close to death, recovery spells were used on him. So 5 more days passed. Ichiro's face was exhausted. Ryuguin said that Ichiro continues to explore this world. All of this will be meaningless when he returns to their world. Ryuguin looked at Ichiro and said that was he really that curious? If he didn't know something, he should just ask the inhabitants of this world. Ichiro was unhappy with Ryuguin's words. Ichiro raised his hand up and said that they could only trust each other. Because they came from the same world, it would be nice to help each other at least a little. As soon as Ichiro finished speaking, Ryuguin put his hands together and began to yawn tiredly. Ryuguin's body was wearing a black turtleneck. Ichiro pulled back in surprise when he heard Ryuguin's words that Ichiro should trust him since he is a hero, but he cannot trust Ichiro. Ryuguin lifted his hand and leaned it against his face. Then, with a malicious smile, he said that Ichiro was not a hero after all. The door to the room opened. Ryuguin was very angry. He thought he wanted to teach Ryuguin a lesson. But then, Ichiro opens his eyes and notices someone else in the room. Ichiro's face turned red, and he greeted the guest. The guest turned out to be a girl in a beautiful outfit. She was smiling broadly and holding a book in her hands. The girl greeted Ichiro in return. The girl put the book on the table. She put her hands on the book and said that Ichiro works tirelessly every day. Ichiro replied that she was also very diligent. The blonde girl approached Ichiro's face and called him by name. There were drops of sweat and a slight blush on Ichiro's face. He was embarrassed. The girl put her hand on her chest and said that she had already asked that Ichiro could just call her Puffy. Ichiro thought that this girl was a princess. For the past few days, they have been meeting all the time in a library. Ichiro reflected that while he was exploring this world, the princess visited the library for her research. She has a certain theory that she continues to analyze by reading various documents. The princess was holding a book in her hands. Then she looked at Ichiro and said that he should take a break at least sometimes. One should not neglect a night's sleep. These words greatly confused Ichiro, and he hid behind his book. Ichiro's behavior made the princess laugh. The princess lowered her book and looked away thoughtfully. Then she went up to Ichiro and with a smile on her face said that Ichiro would like to talk to her for a while. Ichiro was sitting on a chair and agreed to talk to the princess. He was wondering what the princess wanted to talk about. The princess looked at him and said that she was grateful to him. The princess blushed. Then she raised her hands, clenched into fists, and said that she would like to hear a story about the world from where Ichiro came to them. Ichiro thought for a while, and there was silence in the room. Sometime later, Ichiro ended the story by saying that then the crane said goodbye to the young man. Ichiro leaned on the back of a chair and put his hands behind his head. Then he continued to talk about the man and the crane. There was a bookcase behind Ichiro, and the princess was sitting in front of it. He held up his finger and closed his eyes. Ichiro ended the story with a happy ending. He didn't hear anything in response. Then he opened his eyes and looked in front of him. Ichiro saw that the princess was all in tears, as she found the story very sad, but with a happy ending. Ichiro shouted in surprise that the princess was really crying. Tears were streaming down the princess's eyes. She replied that Ichiro was wrong. Ichiro's face turned red, and he looked away thoughtfully. Morning gradually began to come. Ichiro thought that the princess had said that she was 2 years younger than him. She was just a compassionate and tearful girl. The princess joined hands, and with a smile on her face, said that Ichiro should tell her as many stories as possible. Ichiro thoughtfully put his hand to his face and said that he needed to think, but maybe the princess wants to get stories about airplanes. The princess looked at Ichiro in surprise. Ichiro looked thoughtfully out the window, which was huge, and the sun's rays passed through it into the library. Ichiro noticed the feather of a passing bird. The princess looked out the window in surprise, as soon as Ichiro told her that this was a way of traveling from one country to another. People could travel long distances using airplanes. Ichiro's look has changed a lot. The princess was standing at the window. She folded her arms on her chest and said that if she were in Ichiro's world, she would definitely fly on an airplane. Ichiro stood in surprise and watched the princess. The princess's gaze was blank. She continued to say that then, she would have gone to a place where no one would find her. Ichiro was even more surprised by the princess's words. The princess's face turned red. Ichiro called her by name, which surprised and scared her a lot. The princess started to turn around in surprise. The princess put her hand to her face and said with a smile that she was joking like that. Ichiro relented, and there was a bookcase behind him. The princess looked away and continued to say with a smile that life exclusively within the walls of the royal castle can be a little depressing. Ichiro was surprised by the princess's words. The starry sky stretched over the roofs of the castle. Ichiro thought that he would never forget the sad expression on the princess's face when she said those words. A few more days passed. There was a lush forest outside the windows of the room, and mountains beyond the forest. Someone said it was time to hit the road. The princess and Ichiro were sitting at a table in the library. There were several books on the table. The guys looked thoughtfully out the window. There was a large bookcase behind them. The princess looked at Ichiro and said she was wondering why Ichiro was training so hard and reading books. Ichiro did not take his eyes off the window and began to answer the princess that he was doing this in order to save this world. Trees and a cloudy sky were visible outside the window. Ichiro went on to say that it would be a good answer, but really he just wants to go home. It's better for him. The princess looked at Ichiro and listened to him. Ichiro smiled as he remembered himself as a little boy and his grandparents. Then he said that there were people in his world who were worried about him. For the most part, he was raised by his grandparents, since his parents work a lot. The princess joined her hands together and said that this was what she expected from Ichiro. He has a kind heart. Ichiro works for his family and Mr. Luguin. Ichiro looked at the princess in surprise. The princess opened her eyes and looked at Ichiro. Then she smiled and said that maybe she was wrong. Ichiro looked away, embarrassed. Ichiro then joined his hands together and said that for the most part he was trying for the sake of the family. But his efforts should also help Ryuguin. The princess abruptly stood up from her chair and said that she had made a decision. Up to this point she had worked hard to behave like a princess, for her own sake. Ichiro looked at the princess and listened attentively to her. The princess put her hands on her chest. Then she imagined empty houses and said that now she wants to work for the benefit of the people and the person who is dear to her. Ichiro opened his mouth in surprise. The princess put her hand on her chest and looked at Ichiro. Then she said that, like Ichiro, she would strive forward to be proud of herself and she would discover her world. Ichiro blushed at the words he heard. The princess abruptly took Ichiro's hand and looked him straight in the eyes. Then she said that the world of tranquility and the development of magic, and, in addition, her world would be similar to Ichiro's world. Ichiro looked at the princess' hands in embarrassment. The princess didn't let go of Ichiro's hand and kept saying that's why she was. The princess abruptly interrupted her conversation. Realizing everything that was happening, the princess's face turned very red, and her eyes and mouth opened wide in embarrassment and surprise. The princess turned even redder. She put her hands to her face in panic. Ichiro held his hand in the air and did not move. He also blushed and opened his mouth wide in surprise. The princess held her red face in her hands. She looked at Ichiro and said if she could call Ichiro by name. Ichiro's face was red with embarrassment. He was silent for a while. Then he started laughing and said that of course she could call him by his first name, since they were friends. Above the high towers of the castle, the sky stretched out, over which clouds floated. Ichiro asked those around him to call him by his first name. Ichiro was putting wooden boxes in the cart. The older man said that Lee Ichiro was sure that everything was fine. The king and princess would gladly fail him. Ichiro replied that it was enough for him that there was a man here. Ichiro looked at the older man in surprise and thought that he often saw the prime minister when he was studying. But Ichiro did not think that he had such a high opinion of him. Ichiro and the older man started shaking hands, and Ichiro said he was grateful to him. They would do everything in their power to support each other. Suddenly, Ichiro heard someone calling him. Ichiro started to turn in the direction from where he heard the sound. Ichiro was called by the captain. A man with a scar on his face was standing nearby and smiling. The captain was wearing iron armor. The captain approached Ichiro and with a smile on his face said that he would tell him in secret that Ichiro had surpassed him a long time ago. Ichiro put his finger to his face and thoughtfully replied that it was really true. The captain replied that Ichiro should be more confident in himself. The captain smiled and said that since Ichiro had gone through such hellish training, he could handle everything else. Ichiro was a knight who was also ready to sacrifice himself for their country and the whole world. Ichiro frowned a little and said that when he returned, the captain should practice with him again. The captain and Ichiro hugged each other. The captain said with a smile that he agreed to Ichiro's proposal. Ichiro said the captain was hurting him. Suddenly, Someone shouted. Ichiro looked away as he heard the princess's voice. There was a cart next to Ichiro. The princess's face was red, and there were drops of tears in her eyes. Then she shouted that she would always wait for his return. The princess continued to shout that she loved him infinitely. Beads of sweat appeared on Ichiro's face, and his face turned red. The princess ran joyfully and said that when he returned, she and they would finally be together. There was an unusually bright aura around the princess, and flower petals were flying in the air. Ichiro thought that he didn't know then that this was the beginning of a real hell. The princess hugged Ryuguin, and everything she said before was dedicated to him. Ryuguin stood with a malicious smile and looked ahead. Ichiro was standing on a dream, his arms outstretched. He turned pale, and beads of sweat were running down his face as he finally realized what was happening around him. Above the lush crowns of the trees was the sky, through which lush clouds floated. The cart was traveling along the road. Ichiro thought that it had been 2 weeks since they left the royal court, and now they were heading for the first maze the mirror one. Ichiro was riding in the carriage. His gaze was lost, and a trickle of saliva was flowing from his open mouth. Ichiro was thinking about something. Curtains hung on the windows of the carriage. Tears welled up in Ichiro's eyes. He remembered the smiling princess, and thought that he had tried to talk to the princess, but she was distant. Did it really just seem to him that they were on good terms? All this time she was thinking about Ryuguin. Ichiro gritted his teeth and squeezed his eyes shut. Then he thought that he would not have the courage to discuss this topic with the princess. Ryuguin was sitting next to Ichiro. Then he said that maybe Mika still took the sweets with her. Mika was riding in the wagons with the guys. Mika looked out the window of the wagon and replied that unfortunately she did not take the sweets. Ryuguin held his hand to his face and looked out the window. Then he replied with displeasure that Miki was of no use. Ichiro looked at Ryuguin in surprise after his words. Ichiro closed his eyes and said with a smile on his face that it seemed like there should be a city in Tupi. Mika raised her hands and enthusiastically replied that Ichiro was right. Before arriving at the maze, they would stop in a city that is famous for its apples. Ichiro continued to fake a smile and thought that it was really this fact that attracted Miki's attention. Ryuguin clasped his hands together and replied with displeasure that how far they were from this city now. Mika looked at Ryuguin calmly and replied that the journey takes about 3 weeks, so they have about 7 days to go. Ryuguin made a dissatisfied sound. Ichiro was a little shocked by Miki's words. The boys continued to ride in silence in the cart. Only the clatter of hooves was heard. Ichiro thought that just like that, the journey of the hero, the holy knight, and the saint continued in a heavy atmosphere. 7 days later, the guys found themselves near a small town. The houses were mostly 2-storied, with fenced fields next to the houses. Ryuguin was winking at the girl who was standing next to him and smiling. Ichiro opened his mouth in surprise. A saint was standing next to Ichiro. She noticed that Ryuguin stopped and did not follow them. The saint took Ryuguin by the hood and said that they needed to talk to the guildmaster first. Ichiro stood still. He was confident and smiling. Ichiro held the hilt of his sword with one hand. A saint was standing next to him. She was also smiling. The saint's long hair was blowing in the wind. Ichiro and the saint looked at the low guild building with delight. Above the door hung a shield and 2 crossed swords. Ichiro held a paper in his hands and said that this was probably the guild building. The saint supported Ichiro. Ryuguin looked around. Ichiro put his hand on his chest and imagined a big, beefy, and bald man. Then he thought that he was wondering what the guildmaster looked like. Suddenly, it would be a frightening and beefy man. Ichiro's face became drooping. The saint started calling Ichiro by name. Ichiro smiled nervously and replied that he was sorry for the delay. He was a little nervous right now. The door opened, and Ichiro apologized for bothering him. There was an unusual girl in front of the guys. She was a guildmaster named Purim. The girl said that the guys were really heroes. The king had already informed her about their arrival. Ichiro had sweat on his face, and he was looking at the girl with a nervous smile. Purim put her hand on the table where there were papers with various magical signs and writings. She said that the first thing they needed to discuss was the details of the mirror maze. Purim introduced the stone monsters and began to say that they had previously managed to explore this maze, and the monsters that are there consist of mirrors. Thus, they can reflect magic. Only physical attacks are effective against them. There was an unusual box on the table in front of the guys. Purim said that the guys should take this portal with them. Ichiro and the saint looked at the table in surprise. Ichiro picked up the portal, and together with the saint, they began to examine it. Purim went on to say that portals are very useful. They can be installed anywhere in the dungeon and continue exploring from the same place. It remains only to gain experience. The guys found themselves outside the walls of the guild. Purim said it was time for them to move out. Behind the crowns of the lush trees, one could see mountains in the sky, over which clouds had drifted away. The guys found themselves at a small gorge. The guys were wary and serious about entering the maze. As soon as the guys saw the first mirror monster, their mouths opened in surprise. Luguin covered his head with his hands and stood aside, while Ichiro took up a sword and began to fight with the mirror monster. There were shards of glass in the air. Ichiro looked back and thought that he had expected this to happen, but it was going much worse than he expected. Luguin stood to the side. He was trying to lift his sword. The weight of the sword made Luguin's face contort. Ichiro watched the scene in silence. Luguin fell to the ground and with tears in his eyes said that it was very hard for him. Ichiro smiled nervously and thought that, as he had assumed, there had been only him and the saint in this squad from the very beginning. A scarf was tied around Ichiro's neck. Ichiro and the saint hid behind a large stone. Ichiro put his hand on his leg and said how much longer the saint could use her healing magic. The saint sat next to Ichiro and stared blankly away. The saint raised her hand and replied that she could use healing magic an unlimited number of times. Her magic would never end. The saint's gaze was full of determination. She put her hand on her chest and said that any wound Ichiro received, she would not hesitate to heal. Ichiro's face turned red, and he thought that this was exactly what he expected from the saint. The mirror monster began to move towards where Ichiro and the saint were hiding. Ichiro looked at the monster and said with a smile on his face that since there was no limit to the saint's magic, then he wouldn't have any problems. The saint was next to Ichiro behind the stone. Ichiro frowned and smiled maliciously. Then he said that there was nothing to be done. The danger could not be avoided. The saint could not worry. He would certainly protect her. Sweat was running down the saint's face, and she opened her mouth and eyes wide in surprise. In the next instant, Ichiro rushed to the side where the glass monster was standing. Before that, he said that if he was still injured, then she would count on the help of a saint. Ichiro was enchanted by his sharp sword. Beads of sweat were running down Ichiro's face. He looked back and saw sharp peaks made of glass. Ichiro shouted that the monster should have fallen by now. Ichiro held a sword in his hands and pushed away from the monster. Ichiro held a sword in his hands and pushed away from the monster. Ichiro found himself on a glass spike. He screamed in pain. Ichiro was covered in wounds, and blood was flowing down his face. A saint came up to Ichiro. She put her hands in front of her, from which there was a glow, and began to use healing magic. Ichiro stood in front of the saint. There was blood on his forehead. Ichiro had dried blood on his face. He looked away and noticed that the glass began to crumble. Ichiro thought that this was just the beginning. He needed to think about the monsters in the dungeons. The next moment, one of the walls crumbles and a huge dragon appears in front of the guys, who opened his mouth and began to growl loudly. The dragon started waving its tail and pointed it towards where Ichiro was standing. Ichiro was scared by the attack. Ichiro's face was bleeding from the dragon's attack. Ichiro opened his mouth and blood spurted out. Ichiro clenched his teeth in anger and pain. Then he shifted his gaze to the side. Luguin was sitting against one of the walls, curled up in a ball and trembling with fear. Ichiro thought that it was unclear where the next monster would come from. He also made a huge mistake. Bruises appeared under Ichiro's eyes. His eyes gradually began to close, and he imagined Luguin and the princess in his arms. Then Ichiro thought that it would be better if Luguin stayed in the castle, although their relationship with the princess would be resolved. Ichiro's eyes began to gradually darken, and he thought that he and Luguin were from the same city. He did not want to take risks alone. In the next instant, the dragon attacked Ichiro with its head. Ichiro ended up on the dragon's face. Blood flowed from Ichiro's mouth, and he let out a soundless scream. Ichiro thought that he had made a big mistake after all. Mika was watching from the sidelines. Her face was drooping and upset, and she was holding her magic staff in her hands. Mika shouted that it was time for them to return. With the help of the portal, Ichiro disappeared. The dragon stood still and did not understand what was happening. Lights twinkled in the darkness. Ichiro reflected that, continuing in the same spirit, he and Miko worked well together after a month. Mika was serious. She started calling Ichiro by name. Ichiro turned in the direction from which he heard Miki's voice. Ichiro stepped back and covered himself with a sharp sword. Mika stood in front of him. She spread her arms to the sides and activated a large magic shield in front of herself and Ichiro. Then Ichiro raised his hands up. He held his swords in them. Ichiro screamed and threw attacking punches. There were sounds of fighting. After a while, coins and jewelry turned out to be in front of the guys. Ichiro said that they did a great job to get this mountain of gold. The guys ended up in some kind of house. There was a large shelf of bottles and papers hung on the wall. Mika asked what they would do next. Ichiro replied that they would use traps, but each time the monsters get stronger. Ichiro held up his finger and continued to say that it was worth sharing the information with everyone, and continued to think about a new strategy. Miki said Ryuguin was busy with other things. Then Miki started screaming nervously. Ichiro asked in a scared voice that maybe something had happened to Miki. She turned away. Mika's face was red. She said she could smell fresh apples with cinnamon. In front of Miki, on a plate, there was a pie. In her eyes, it was brightly sacred. Miki screamed that she could really smell the apple pie. Miki joined her hands together and leaned them against her red face. She was holy with happiness, and said that apple and cinnamon pie is a specialty of this village. She is very glad that she came here. Ichiro and the staff of the institution were very surprised. Ichiro smiled and asked the employee of the establishment that they could taste this pie. The man replied positively. The saint blushed even more. She did not believe that what was happening could be true. There was a pie on the table in front of the guys. The man wished the guys a good appetite. The saint was thoughtful. She took a spoon with a piece of cake and put it in her mouth, while she squeezed her eyes shut. After a moment, tears appeared in Mika's eyes. She put her hands to her red face and began to glow with happiness. There was a plate of pie in front of the guys. Ichiro put his hands on the table and said with a smile that it turns out Miki has such a sweet side. Miki replied sheepishly that she just lost her temper at the sight of the sweet. Ichiro started eating the pie and said that it looked like the workers used good butter to make the pie. Miki excitedly shouted that Ichiro really understood what this pie was made of. Ichiro replied that he had once made such a pie for his sister. These words surprised Miki a lot. Ichiro continued that he could smell the slight aroma of alcohol, and the apples were well cooked. Maybe Miki wanted him to bake a pie for her. Miki was sitting on a chair. She turned to Ichiro and asked in surprise if he could do it. Ichiro replied that if he had groceries, it wouldn't be difficult. Ichiro propped his head on his hand and looked at Miki in embarrassment. Miki put her index fingers together and blushed. Then she embarrassedly said that she would look forward to this moment. An unusual flicker appeared. Ichiro reflected that when Miki says his name, a warm feeling appears in his chest. They fought for the first time 6 months ago. During this time, they managed to get closer. Then she began to spend weekends together. Ichiro walked down the corridor and thought that when they did not forget about their responsibilities, when they had good ideas for improving their strategy, they shared this information with everyone. Ichiro knocked on the door and opened it. Then he said that he would like to add something to their strategy and discuss it with Mika. The door creaked open. Ichiro went into Miki's room and thought that if she was not in the room, she began to go somewhere too often. Mika's room had a wooden bed, a table, and a chair. And there was also a large window. The next moment, Miki opens the door wide. Her expression was alarming. From the unexpected appearance of Miki, Ichiro gets very scared and makes a strange sound. Suddenly, Mika grabs Ichiro's hand and calls his name. Mika holds Ichiro's hand, and she puts her other hand on her chest. Mika's face was red. She couldn't catch her breath and say something. Ichiro was scared, and he nervously said that Miki needed to calm down and tell her what had happened. Miki approached Ichiro's face and confidently said that she would have a small request for him. All this time, Miki was trying to catch her breath. Ichiro blushed. He looked at Miki in surprise and repeated her words about the request. Mika joined her hands together. Blush appeared on her face, and tears appeared in her eyes. Mika looked at Ichiro plaintively and said if he could lend her money. As soon as Ichiro heard Miki's words, his eyes widened in surprise and his mouth opened slightly. Sparks appeared in his head. Mika held her hands together. She looked at Ichiro plaintively. Ichiro started saying that that's it. The neighboring village was badly damaged after the monster attack, and she regularly sends them money. He's right. Ichiro touched his chin and looked up. Then he continued to say that unless such a large sum is required to support the village, it would be better if they bought materials and provisions for the victims. Everything went dark around Mika. She put her hands down and opened her eyes a little. Mika stood motionless with her mouth slightly open in shock. Mika turned away, sweat dripping down her face. She started screaming that she had sent everything she had. Ichiro looked at Mika in surprise. He did not believe her words. Mika's face turned red. She looked down guiltily and said that she had donated all her money to rebuild the village, and now she had no money left at all. Ichiro thought that Mika was a real saint. Ichiro recalled Miki's different facial expressions, how she smiles, gets angry, and sad. Ichiro thought that Mika is sweet and caring. Always sad over the grief of another, she is ready to give everything for the sake of helping others. The sky stretched over the roofs of the small town where the guys were. Fluffy clouds floated across it, and lush trees grew on the streets themselves. Ichiro opened the door a crack. The room was very dark. Ichiro stood in the doorway and looked into the darkness. Then he thought that he was afraid that he would not be able to bear it. Ichiro fell to his knees and covered his face with his hands. He thought he would always be alone. There was a gloomy atmosphere around Ichiro, and black hands began to reach out to him. Ichiro took his hands away from his face. Tears welled up in his eyes. He heard someone's voice saying that they were on his side. The two of them could handle everything. Ichiro saw Miki's happy face. She leaned one hand against her chest, the other pulled towards Ichiro. Then Mika said that before they went into the maze, she needed to tell him something. Everything was flickering in the air around Mika. Then a flickering line appeared in the air. Fluffy clouds floated across the bright sky. A pipe was sticking out of the roof of one of the houses in the city. In front of the house there was a tree with a lush crown. Morning came. Ichiro opened his eyes. Then he bulged them out as something surprised him greatly. Ichiro wished someone a good morning. Luguin stood in front of Ichiro, smiling broadly and saying that it was really a wonderful morning. Mika was standing next to him and snuggled up to Luguin. She looked at him and said that he was beautiful. Mika's face was red. Ichiro remembered the moments when he and Mika fought in the mazes, and how much fun they had. Ichiro thought that they had been through dangerous mazes together with Mika. Mika's eyes looked very strange, as if she was fascinated by something. Yamiro stood with his hand raised and watched Mika smile and walk away from him. Then she said that she adored the hero. Ichiro thought that Mika had left him exactly the same. Ichiro's expression changed. He became drooping and bit his lips in anger. Ryugen shifted his gaze to Ichiro. Ryugen was sitting on the couch and hugging Mika. Ryugen looked to the side where Ichiro was standing and said that Ichiro was just a dead weight for them. Because of him, the morale of their group was being lowered. Mika stared in front of her with a fascinated gaze. Ichiro turned around and frowned. Then he began to shout in displeasure that he was a hero. How could the morality of their group suffer? Maka glared at Ichiro and said that only through trust can you go through the mazes. Because of Ichiro, the mood in the group is not worse. He must take responsibility. Ichiro wondered why Mika was saying that. Ryugen looked at Ichiro and said that why doesn't Ichiro go to the maze and earn some money for them? Mika smiled and said that she supported the hero's words. Ichiro started shouting that Ryugen should shut up. He's not in the mood. Ichiro's face was red, and tears were flowing from his eyes. Ichiro began to shout that. Now he did not intend to leave his room for a whole month. Ichiro's nose was red from crying. He turned in the direction from which he heard the words that this would be a problem. Ryugen and Mika stood next to each other and looked at Ichiro in surprise. Polmi was in the room with the guys. She raised her hand and said that she wanted to discuss something with the guys. The girl's hair was braided. She was wearing gloves on her hands, and a belt was tightened on her shorts. Polmi leaned on the counter and looked at Ichiro. Then she said that she would like to express her thoughts about the latest research. Ichiro came up to the counter. He raised his hand and said that they had no problems with passing the mazes yet. Polmi started to say that Ichiro was right, but then the monsters would be better protected from physical attacks. Polmi's hair covered half of her face. Ichiro thoughtfully put his hand to his chin and looked down. Then he said that their group mainly uses physical attacks. Ichiro looked in front of him and said that in that case, they need a magician in the group. Can Pomi help with this question? Momi raised her hand and said with a smile on her face that she knew Ichiro would say that. Someone knocked on the door to the room where the guys were. Pomi looked at the door and said that was why she had already found the perfect candidate for the position of magician. Pomi turned to the door and with a smile on her face said that she was grateful that she had come. Now this is a new magician who will be on the guys' team. A girl with a headdress entered the room. She was looking down. There was a girl in front of the guys. She had long hair and a hat on her head. The girl put her hand on her chest and with a smile on her face said that her name was Angelica Honest. A bright light appeared around the girl. Angelica's face turned red with embarrassment. She winked and said that in the power of magic, there is no one better than herself. The girl's hair was sticking out in different directions from under the hat. Everything was plunged into darkness, and gradually light began to appear from below. Ichiro thought that together with Mika, they had gone through a long and difficult path in the mirror labyrinths. It seemed to him that he and Mika had become closer. Ichiro remembered how Mika held Ryuguin's hand. She admired him and confessed her love to him, and Ichiro watched helplessly. Blurred black spots began to appear on the white background. Ichiro thought that he did not understand what had happened, but, through the eyes of the guild, he found a new ally for them to conquer the labyrinths. Angelica was sitting on the floor. She had an ornament around her neck on which a bat was hanging. Angelica's outfit had fur and feathers sticking out. The girl's face was a little cocky, and she was smiling shyly. She had various ornaments on her arms. Angelica looked down. She was sad. Behind her were people who belonged to her family. Everyone knew about her kind. They were famous wizards. But Angelica's family considered her an outcast. The little girl raised her hand up and began to conjure. Two adults were looking at her with a smile. It was Angelica. When she was a child, it was believed that she would become a very powerful witch. Angelica became an adult, and other magicians began to whisper behind her back. As she grew up, Angelica revealed one flaw. A bright light appeared in the darkness. Angelica possessed boundless energy, but she could use only a small part of it, so she is only able to use initial magic. Angelica walked in the flickering darkness with books in her hands. After finding out this circumstance, Angelica was kicked out of the Honest family. Angelica held her hands out in front of her and conjured. The stone on her hands rose into the air. Angelica was surprised. Pomi was watching what was happening. Angelica impressed the guildmaster with her knowledge of magic. Pomi looked at Angelica with a smile on her face. Angelica was holding a roll of paper in her hands and smiling broadly. Despite everyone's reproaches, Angelica was able to graduate from the Royal Academy of Magic. Angelica got along well with the guildmaster, and she decided to become Angelica's guardian. Ichiro nervously raised his hand and said that was why he was chosen. Ichiro was wearing armor. A sword hung from his belt, and a scarf was tied around his neck. Pomi folded her arms under her chest. Then she closed her eyes and said that since the guys were from another world, they could help Angelica become a better person. Ichiro was standing next to Pomi. He tried to object to her, but she interrupted him. Ichiro stared in front of him in surprise, sweat dripping down his face. Pomi put her hand on her chest and anxiously said that she was asking Ichiro for help, since she herself could not help Angelica. Ichiro stared in front of him in surprise. There was a closet and a window in the room. Ichiro thought for a while and agreed to Pomi's suggestion. Then he said that if Pomi would let him, he was ready to take Angelica into the maze. Pomi's expression changed. She began to shine with joy and with a smile on her face said that Ichiro could take Angelica with him. But the main thing was that the guys did not forget about safety. Angelica enthusiastically raised her hand, which she clenched into a fist. Then she seemed that she would definitely be useful to the guys. 2 belts were tightened on Angelica's stomach, and jewelry was worn on her arm. Angelica's expression was very serious. She looked towards where her mentor, Pomi, was standing, and looked at Angelica with a smile on her face. Ichiro stood in a fighting stance, his sword dangling from his belt. Ichiro looked back warily. Angelica was standing nearby. She put her hand in front of her and began to conjure. bright flashes of light began to appear next to Ichiro. Ichiro looked in front of him. The brightest flashes of light began to appear in the air. They had previously been conjured by Angelica. Ichiro abruptly began to squint and cover his face with his hand. He began to scream nervously. Ichiro was wearing a glove and protective gear on his hand. Ichiro squeezed his eyes shut and started shouting that he couldn't see anything. He understood everything. Angelica could already stop conjuring. Angelica stood aside in surprise. Bright flashes flickered around. Ichiro frowned and opened his eyes. He remembered Angelica's words, that there is no one stronger than her in magic. Ichiro said with displeasure that he now understood what Angelica had said earlier. Angelica stood and stared in front of her with a surprised expression. Her witch hat tilted to the side. Angelina said she didn't understand what Ichiro was talking about. Ichiro looked at Angelica and said if she remembered how she used light magic the other day, if she could do the same thing, only with fire magic. Angelica put her hand to her face and said that of course it could. It would be easier than that. A bright line appeared that flickered. Ichiro reflected that he had been exploring the labyrinths all this time and wanted to rest for 1 month. Using this break, he and Angelica immersed themselves in studying her magic. Ichiro looked at Angelica and said if she could use the initial fire magic, called Spark. Angelica thoughtfully put her hand to her chin and replied that she could. But what exactly did Ichiro want? Angelica continued to hold her hand on her chin and stare thoughtfully in front of her. Ichiro said that if she managed to create a lot of sparks and then blow them up, ordinary magic is activated by a chain, in the order of their creation. Ichiro scratched his head nervously. Then he closed his eyes and said with a smile that, although he did not understand this topic too well. Angelica frowned. The visor of her hat covered her face, and she said that Lee Ichiro could help her with something. Ichiro's eyes widened as he was surprised by Angelica's words. A bright sky spread over the lush crowns of the trees, with clouds floating across it. Angelica said she still wanted to try what Ichiro was talking about. The guys ended up on the street. Angelica was holding a magic staff in her hand. Angelica looked up and said that first she needed to create sparks. Ichiro was standing behind Angelica, and fireballs began to appear around the guys. Angelica was holding a magic staff in her hands. There was an unusual ball at the top of the staff. Angelica was conjuring and clumps of magical energy began to appear above the staff. Angelica held her hand out in front of her and shouted a spell to summon flames. A fireball appeared in front of Angelica. Ichiro watched with his mouth open. When she finished conjuring, Angelica clenched her hand into a fist and with a smile on her face said that now the sparks can be combined into a chain flame. Ichiro stood behind and said that it was possible to create something like this with the magic of the waters. Ichiro was very surprised when Angelica replied that of course it was possible. The principle would be the same. Ichiro thought he was just giving a little advice, and Angelica was able to figure it out for herself. She really is a genius. Tears began to form in Angelica's eyes. She could barely contain herself. Ichiro thought that the family had abandoned her since she could only use basic magic. Why didn't they pay attention to her perfect control of magic? Ichiro approached Angelica. He held up his finger and said that if it were possible, he would create a water blade. Angelica looked at Ichiro in surprise. She smiled and replied that Ichiro's creative approach was really surprising. Angelica imagined a magical whirlpool and thought that she would never allow herself to be mocked again. Angelica then uttered the magic words to form a water stream. Angelica raised her hand up and water bubbles formed over the guys. Ichiro was standing next to him, his mouth wide open in surprise. Angelica thought it was her original water blade magic. Gradually, the sun began to set and night fell over the small town. Stars began to appear in the sky. The lights in the houses have not been turned on yet. There was a glass bottle with a drink on the table and a wooden mug next to it. Angelica said that she and Ichiro had really been having fun lately. The wooden mugs were in the hands of the guys. Angelica's face was red, and she started drinking a drink from a wooden glass. Ichiro watched Angelica in surprise. Angelica was sitting on the bed. Her face was red. She was twirling a mug in different directions. She exhaled and said that maybe Ichiro was biased against her. Ichiro began to get nervous. He made a guilty expression on his face and seemed that Angelica had really drunk a lot. Why was she asking such strange questions? Angelica took off her hat and put it on the bed. Then she said that when it comes to magic, Ichiro is so enthusiastic about helping her. Ichiro sat on a chair and listened attentively to Angelica. Angelica's face was very red. She looked at Ichiro with a smile and began to thank him for everything. Angelica's hair was sticking out in different directions. Ichiro looked at Angelica and replied that he didn't really care about saving this world. Angelica was holding a wooden glass in her hands. She raised her head and said with a smile that Ichiro helped her calm down and believe in herself. She thought that because of her family, she would not be able to become a normal magician. Then Angelica closed her eyes and, with a short smile on her face, said that Ichiro did not despise her. Angelica was surprised as Ichiro stood in front of her and said that she had helped him. Angelica was attentively to Ichiro's words. Tears began to flow down Ichiro's face, and he clenched his teeth hard. Then Angelica came up to him and hugged him, saying that Ichiro should not cry. He could tell her everything. Ichiro thought that he had been holding back all this time and was finally able to speak out. Angelica held up her finger and said with a smile that since they were going to the maze, they should know everything about each other. After that, Ichiro told Angelica everything that was on his mind. Ichiro's nose was red from crying. Angelica approached Ichiro. She took his hand and said that he had to promise her that there would be no secrets between them. Ichiro looked at Angelica in surprise. Then Ichiro smiled and nodded. After a little thought, Ichiro said that he agreed to Angelica's proposal and made his promise. Fluffy clouds floated over the house where the guys lived. In the same way, another month has passed, and they have developed a new strategic plan for the passage of the maze. Ichiro and Angelica stared in front of them in surprise. Miki stood in front of them. She put her hand on her chest and said that she would like to change their group composition. Luguin stood behind her and agreed with her words. Ichiro put his hand to his chin and said with displeasure that their formation was already good. Luguin was in the vanguard, and he was protecting the rear. Mika and Angelica were helping with magic from behind. Ichiro squeezed his eyes shut as Miki started shouting that such a plan was too dangerous for Mr. Luguin. Miki turned away from the guys and went to Luguin. She said that they were obliged to protect the hero, so they needed to change the formation. If the guys refused, then she and Luguin would leave this group. Ichiro and Angelica stood apart with their mouths open. They were silently thinking about something. Miki said that she and Luguin had to go. The guys found themselves at an unusual door in Skull. A tree with a thick trunk and a lush crown grew nearby. The entrance to the maze was braided with vines. Ichiro stood to the side, drooling from his mouth as he did not understand what was happening. Miki extended her hand to Luguin and healed him. Mika was holding Ryuguin's hand, and Luguin turned around and looked at Ichiro with a smile. Luguin hugged Miki and looked towards the guys. Then he said that this is what true camaraderie means. Mika replied that the hero should not be afraid. If he needs her healing power, she is ready to help him. Ichiro and Angelica stood to the side. Ichiro had a strange expression on his face. Angelica told Ichiro that, "Doesn't it all look too stupid?" A light appeared on a dark background. Angelica continued with displeasure that the saint was behaving too strangely. She should pay more attention to the avant-garde. Ichiro supported Angelica's words. Ichiro tearfully recalled the time when he and Miki fought together. Ichiro thought that even though Miki had changed, they had been through a lot together, and he could trust her with his back. There was an explosion behind the guys. It scared them. Angelica started shouting Ichiro's name. Ichiro turned around and started waving his sword. Ichiro began to wipe his face with his hand. Angelica stood nearby and said with a smile that Ichiro was amazing. He coped with the monster alone. Ichiro looked at the monster's body and thought that after all, it didn't seem to him, it became much easier for him to deal with monsters. Angelica looked in front of her and nervously said that she could feel an incredibly powerful energy behind that door. There was a big door in front of the guys. Everything was covered in dust. The door gradually began to open. A blonde girl appeared in front of the guys. Her arms and neck were bandaged, and large wings protruded from behind her back. The guys looked at the girl in surprise. The girl's eyes were closed. Then she abruptly opened them, and a dark liquid began to flow from her eyes. And her pupils were missing. Ichiro looked away and nervously shouted that this monster was coming. Angelica was standing next to Ichiro. The monster began to flap its wings. Ichiro got into a fighting stance and started reaching for his sword. Ichiro held onto the hilt of his sword and looked up nervously. Ichiro unsheathed his sword and deflected the sword strike. Angelica's magic staff appeared in her hands. Angelica started attacking the monster with bullets of light. The monster began to cover its body with its wings. A thick fog began to appear around the guys. The guys stood next to each other and carefully watched what was happening. Ichiro stared in front of him and nervously shouted that the monster had really repelled the attack. Angelica started saying the monster is not susceptible to physical attacks and light magic. Angelica looked at Ichiro's back. He thought that before, they would not have been able to cope with such monsters. But now Angelica is with them. Ichiro said that it was an angel of light. Did they really get into the labyrinth of light? Did they really get into the labyrinth of light? Angelica stared ahead in confusion and held her magic wand tightly. Ichiro said they needed a spell that could defeat this monster. Angelica smiled and seemed to have a special spell, but she needed some time to prepare. Ichiro held his sword out in front of him and warily said that he understood. He intended to distract the monster with himself. Angelica and Ichiro stood back to back. Angelica smiled and said that she believed in Ichiro's powers. Ichiro held the sword in his hands and said that Angelica could rely on him. The monster with wings was advancing on Ichiro. Ichiro rushed forward, a weapon in one hand. Ichiro opened his eyes wide and saw a flash in front of him. The monster said that they are lost souls and must return to the light. Ichiro began to panic, sweat dripping down his face. The monster went on to say that the great spirits that slumber in the depths of the earth are doldens, to direct their anger at the enemy. Angelica started screaming that she was ready to attack. Angelica held a magic staff in one hand. She raised her other hand up and cast a spell. A bright flash of light appeared above Angelica and the monster. Angelica's attack hit the monster right in the chest. The monster's wings burned to the ground, and the monster began to emit a loud scream. Luguin and Mika stood to the side. They were screaming in fear and hugging each other. The monster turned to ashes. The guys ended up in the guild. Ichiro told me everything that happened in the maze. Ichiro said that thanks to Angelica, he was able to defeat the monster. Pulmi replied that she was not mistaken when she believed in Angelica. Ichiro and Pulmi looked at Angelica, and she said that Ichiro was wrong. Without his help, she would not have coped. She thanks Ichiro for that. Tears and a smile appeared in Angelica's eyes. Ichiro was embarrassed and said he hadn't done anything. Clouds floated over one of the towers of the city. Tall and lush trees grew next to the building. There was a bag of gold in the air. Someone said it was the guy's reward. Ichiro stood in front of the guys and said that they shouldn't waste all the money. Ryuguin was holding a bag of gold in his hands, and Mika was standing next to him. Ryuguin exhaled heavily. Then Ryuguin turned around. The light began to fall on him, and he said that the role of the hero was very difficult, so he would have to manage this money. Ichiro looked at Ryuguin strangely. Ryuguin raised his finger and said with a smile that everything was right. The hero should manage the group's money. Ichiro made the right decision when he gave the money to him. Mika admired Ryuguin. Ichiro thought that he had made a big mistake. Ichiro closed his eyes and nervously said that he and Angelica should return and then eat. Ichiro heard from Angelica that he had to wait. As soon as Ichiro heard Angelica's words, then he nervously opened his eyes and became alert. Ichiro's face turned pale. Angelica stood there, her face flushed, and she said that she wanted to say that she was grateful to him for allowing her to join their group. Then Angelica went up to someone and snuggled up to him. She kept saying that she was ready to make every effort for the hero. Angelica clung to Ryuguin, her face red with embarrassment. Angelica began to smile widely. Her eyes seemed to be enchanted. Ichiro slashed a huge monster with a sword that had eyes all over its body. It's been a year since Angelica left. Ichiro landed on his knee. He began to wipe his wounded face with his hand, and said that this time, he managed to defeat the monster alone. Over the past year, Ichiro has managed to clear 4 labyrinths, and he did it all alone. The names of the guys were written on the paper, and who occupies what place in the fight against monsters. Ryuguin's name was not on the list. Ichiro didn't understand what it all meant. Mika put her hand on her chest and said that their powers were meant for the hero. The hero should not be put in danger, so they would stay away from the fight. Ichiro shouted that the guys were too far away. There were girls standing next to Ryuguin. Their eyes were strange. The girls looked at Ryuguin in fascination and idolized him. Ichiro twisted his face. He began to reflect that, looking at the girls. From the outside, it all looks too strange. He does not understand what could have happened to the girls. Ichiro remembered the happy faces of the girls when he first met them. Ichiro thought that Mika's calmness and Angelica's desire were not the slightest bit settled. Then Ichiro looked at the girls' expressions now. They looked very strange. Their faces were red, and their eyes were enchanted. Ichiro gritted his teeth and lowered his head. Then Ichiro thought that there was no point in thinking about it now. Their group is now. These are empty words. There were many plants growing on one of the streets. Ichiro thought that the guys had told him to go to the maze and continue destroying monsters. Ichiro was walking down the street. His expression was too serious. Ichiro thought that according to the king, there were only 6 mazes left. If he continued in the same spirit, he would be able to return to his world in a year and a half. Someone called Ichiro. A girl in a dress and armor stood in front of Ichiro. The girl leaned her hand against her stomach and said that her name was Alice Gladius. It was Ichiro who was the hero here. Ichiro looked at the girl in surprise and thought that this was really the daughter of the Knight Commander. Ichiro turned away from the girl. Then he raised his hand and with a sad smile said that the girl was mistaken and it wasn't him. The girl stood still and looked at Ichiro. The girl raised her hand and looked at the sword in Ichiro's hands. Then she said that, then why was he holding a holy sword in his hands? Ichiro looked at the sword and looked confused, as if the hero had given him the sword himself. Ichiro remembered Luguin crying and covering himself with his hands while shouting that Ichiro could take this sword, but in return he had to deal with the monsters as soon as possible. Ichiro introduced himself to the girl. Then he said that he was a member of the hero group. Alice stood in place and listened to Ichiro in surprise. The next moment, Alice abruptly bent down. Then she screamed that she had one request for Ichiro. Could he fight her? The girl did not raise her head and tightly squeezed her eyes shut. Alice looked in front of her with a serious expression on her face. She remembered herself as a little girl. At that time, she was holding a sword in her hands. Since early childhood, she had been training with a sword. She dreamed of becoming a knight and wanted to eventually take possession of the holy sword. The commander with the scar on his face smiled and said that it did not matter in whose hands the holy sword would be. The main thing was that it was the most powerful weapon of mankind. Ichiro looked at the captain in surprise and thought that these words from the captain sounded like he had to give up possession of the sword. Alice's expression was serious. Ichiro thought that Alice had come here to fight a duel and see how strong she was. On the contrary, Ichiro was standing with Alice. Ichiro replied that he agreed to fight with Alice. The guys found themselves on a small clearing. Grass grew around them and trees surrounded them. Ichiro took a fighting stance, and Alice began to reach for her weapon. Alice's hand touched the weapon, and she started screaming that she was Ilia Gladys and she was ready to start a fight. There was a bright flash and a ringing sound of swords. The guys were next to each other, their swords touched. The guys stared at each other menacingly, and their swords began to shake. Ichiro deflected Alice's blow and jumped aside. Ichiro thought that this was what he expected from the captain's daughter. Her every blow is very strong. He barely manages to block them. Ichiro stared ahead warily. Then Ichiro struck, and a scratch appeared on Alice's face. Ichiro thought that perhaps because of her straightforward nature, her attacks were too predictable. Alice smiled. She picked up the sword and said that her father had told her about Ichiro. He said that Ichiro was a strong man, and he had gone through hellish trials. At this time, Alice struck Ichiro, but he managed to dodge. Ichiro jumped back. Alice went on to say that in just 1 month, Ichiro managed to defeat her father in a duel and conquer the mirror maze alone. Then Ichiro pursed his lips and closed his eyes. His face turned red with embarrassment, and he said that the captain had overpraised him. Ichiro charged. Alice held her sword tightly and repelled Ichiro's attacks. Alice said that despite this, she couldn't afford to lose. Ichiro stood to the side. He leaned his hand on the ground. Then he smiled and said that Alice was fighting well too. Alice held her sword out in front of her and rushed to attack Michiro. Ichiro thought that he was sorry. He would like to continue fighting with Alice. Ichiro struck again, and Alice's eyes widened in surprise. In the next instant, her sword was in the air, and she was on the ground. Alice was sitting on the ground. She covered her eyes with her hand and said she was giving up. Alice hid her crying face. Ichiro was standing next to her. He put his hand to his chin and looked at Alice thoughtfully. Ichiro and Alice were sitting on a stump. Ichiro lowered his head and said that Alice had calmed down. There were still tears in Alice's eyes, and she looked at Ichiro. Alice put her hands on her feet and looked at Ichiro with tear-stained eyes. Then she said that she had calmed down and everything was fine now. The guy sat and looked at the huge moon, which was located in the starry sky. Alice said that Ichiro is indeed a worthy sword owner. Ichiro did not take his eyes off the moon and said that why Alice thought he was not worthy of the sword. Ichiro turned to Alice. He put his hand on his chest and said that Alice would trust him with her future. Alice looked straight into Ichiro's eyes in surprise. Then Alice's face turned red. She put her hands to her face and screamed that Ichiro really loved her. This could not be. Ichiro's face was also slightly flushed, and sweat was running down his face. Ichiro closed his eyes and raised his hand. He replied that this was not what he meant at all. Ichiro looked up and said that he noticed one detail when he was fighting against Alice. Alice looked at Ichiro in surprise. Alice looked in front of her and said that during the battle she was very flexible, just like water. Ichiro wants to tell her that. Ichiro replied that Alice was right. Alice's face turned slightly red. She turned to Ichiro and said that she was really good at everything. Ichiro offered to train Alice. Alice clenched her hands into fists and blushed. Then she started shouting that Ichiro wanted to accompany her. Ichiro broke out in sweat and replied that she had misunderstood him again. Alice was all red. She closed her eyes and put her hands on her legs. Ichiro said with a smile that Alice had calmed down. She replied positively. Alice straightened up and said that they would train, just like at the castle. There was a starry sky above the guys. They discussed further training. Ichiro walked thoughtfully in front, with Alice behind him. Ichiro abruptly turned to her and asked if she was staying at a hotel. Alice stopped. She smiled and replied that she was staying at the same hotel as the rest of the guys. Alice's face lit up, and she said that in order to improve her skills, she should be as close as possible to the master himself. Ichiro said Alice was talking nonsense. Alice abruptly hugged Ichiro and started screaming that Ichiro should live with her. Ichiro got scared and asked to be released. Morning came. Ichiro got out of bed and thought that yesterday he had had too busy a day. He had not had so much fun in a long time. Ichiro looked to the other side of his bed in surprise and thought that now he would be terrifying with Alice. He should not relax. Ichiro started screaming so that he could be heard on the street. Alice was in her shirt and rubbing her sleepy eyes. The guys started discussing Alice's sudden appearance in Ichiro's bed. Alice was holding a plate of food in her hands and trying to feed Ichiro. Ichiro was angry about the current situation. Ichiro was very surprised when Alice said that unless one was a student, she couldn't do basic things. She was really useless. Alice put her hands together and leaned them against her face. Then she said that she was very glad that she was able to please Ichiro. There was a strange noise in the institution where the guys were. It was a training ground. There was a shelf against the wall and a holder for various weapons. Alice started screaming and reached for her weapon to attack Ichiro. Ichiro stood nearby and waited for the moment to deflect the blow. The guys clashed in a duel. There was a table and a chair on the playground, and the audience watched the fight and verbal sparring of the guys. Two men were watching the scene. They started discussing that when the guys get tired, they drink a restorative potion. Alice was standing not far from Ichiro. She was closely watching his movements and thought that with a little more pressure, she would overcome Ichiro. Ichiro looked in front of him. He grinned and took up a fighting pose. Alice was standing in place, a weapon in her hands. Alice noticed that Ichiro was distracted. She started waving her weapon and rushed to attack. Water clots appeared around Alice. Alice's sword inflicted a wound on Ichiro. Ichiro's sword fell to the ground. He looked at the fallen sword in surprise. Alice stood with a sword in her hand. Tears appeared on Alice's face. She started jumping with happiness and shouting that she had done it. She had succeeded. Ichiro began to praise Alice. Ichiro came up to Alice. He pointed to the side with his finger and said that they needed to come up with a name for this attack. The guys stood there for a while. The guys found themselves on the street. Ichiro looked at Alice and said that he was interested in what she wanted to achieve. Alice looked at Ichiro in surprise. Ichiro replied that he wanted to return to his world and she wanted to join the Order of Chivalry. Alice became sad and thoughtful. Alice went ahead and started saying that before meeting Ichiro, she wanted to follow in her father's footsteps. She wanted to become a knight and protect people from monsters. Ichiro was surprised by this answer. Ichiro was very surprised when he heard Alice say that. Now she wants to be the one who can walk shoulder to shoulder with Ichiro. Ichiro looked away, embarrassed. The guys ended up at the hotel. They began to discuss that they would soon be on their way. Alice said she was offering to rest tomorrow and then get on the road. Ichiro was greatly surprised by this suggestion. Ichiro hesitantly asked Alice if she really wanted to go with him. Alice replied sharply that Ichiro really thinks I'm going to leave him. Alice imagined swords stuck in the ground. Ichiro began to tell how dangerous the labyrinths he was heading into were. Alice started shouting angrily that she understood everything. She would be able to stand up for herself without anyone's help. Alice put her hands down and started shouting that wherever Ichiro goes, she will go. She will always be by his side. Ichiro didn't know what to say to that. Alice leaned her hand against her chest and plaintively began to say that more than anything in the world, she did not want Ichiro to be left alone. Night fell and the stars appeared in the sky. 3 days later, the guys headed to the maze. Ichiro stood at the counter and asked the woman to give the letter to Luguin. Ichiro looked at the burning windows of the hotel. Ichiro thought with a plaintive face that he needed to get back to Alice's hotel as soon as possible. The girls were standing next to Ryugini. He said that they needed to try to save this world. Ichiro thought that Ryuginin had not changed at all. The girls continued to stick to him, although Ichiro should be all for it. The girls stood nearby and began to say that they were ready to defeat any monster that stood in the way of the hero. Ryugin blushed. He started waving his finger and said that the girls needed to stop fighting over him. They should live together. Ryugin began to look at Alice and said with a smile that the hero, the saint, the sorceress, and the knight. Isn't this the ideal hero group? Ichiro got very angry because of Ryugin's words. He said that it was time for him and Alice to go. The next moment, a loud sound suddenly rang out. Alice struck with her sword at the strange creature. Ichiro stood to the side, staring in front of him in fright. Alice was behind Ichiro. She looked back and said that this was the heroes group. Ichiro replied that Alice was right. Ryugin was hiding behind the girls. Alice turned around and said that Ryugin couldn't even be called a hero even though he was a hero, but he clearly didn't want to become one. Ichiro smiled and replied that his class is a holy knight, however, and he is not without sin. The main thing is to listen to his heart and firmly follow his path. Alice smiled and supported Ichiro's words. Alice and Ichiro opened their mouths in surprise when they saw a huge black monster that had several arms and was armed. Alice rushed into the attack and began to deliver crushing blows to the monster. The monster's arms were cut into how many pieces? Alice held up her sword and said she had won. Ichiro looked at her. He took his sword and said that Alice was good. Ichiro threw his sword and said that Alice should catch him. The sword was right in Alice's hands. She was very surprised. Ichiro said that Alice can use it now. Alice looked at the sword with admiration and said how she could use Ichiro's sword. Alice was at a loss. Ichiro began to say that she had shown the light of the sword all her life. Alice really deserved to use this sword. Ichiro patted his hand on his shoulder. Then he smiled and said that with or without a sword, he would always be a master for Alice. Alice was in tears. She agreed with Ichiro's words. The boys started down the stairs. The guys were walking warily. Ichiro looked ahead and said that she was already very close. They needed to be more careful. Alice agreed. The darkness began to open up in front of the guys. The guys found themselves in an empty area with various swords sticking out of it. Ichiro said that there was a field of swords in the moonlight in this maze. Ichiro looked ahead warily. There was a huge sword in front of the guys. It glowed all over and illuminated the darkness that surrounded everything. The guys cautiously examined the unusual sword. The main character, Ichiro Yamada, once in the dungeon with his companions, goes into its very depths, seeing a field dotted with swords. One of them was emitting a bright light. The guy's eyes widen in surprise. He asks a question into the void, because he does not understand what is in front of him. The same surprise overtakes Alice Gladius, because in front of her, both she and the young man see a holy sword or a semblance of a magic blade, albeit slightly different from what the main character currently has in his hands. No one understands how the weapon got here at all. Clenching his teeth tightly, the young man turns his gaze towards the hilt of the sword, now clutched in his hand. He examines it, realizing that all this time, the blade with which he killed monsters most likely turned out to be a fake, and now there is a real sacred weapon in front of him. At the same moment, under the surprised stares and gaping mouths of Ichiro and Alice, the glowing sword soars into the air and becomes even brighter. The light comes from a crystal located on the handle, and it seems that this radiance does not bode well. The young man realizes that something needs to be done about this, so he points to Mika and demands that she create a barrier to protect herself from a possible shockwave created by the sword. But in response to this, Prince Ryuguin says that there is no point in this and simply advises the guy to destroy the sword, because he and his teammates will not waste their strength. Angelica, Honest, the sorceress on the team, agrees with the prince, telling him to do everything exactly as he said. At the same moment, a spell called a Chain of Lightning flies at the weapon in the air, and after that, the sword is stuck in the ground. There is no more radiance coming from it, and the danger has passed. While the guy looks confused, the prince begins to praise his strength, says that this is what the true strength of the hero looks like, and Yamada should still learn and gain experience, and Angelica agrees with Ryuguin in everything this time. The young man thinks that this spell was worse than it could have been. Usually, after all, Anji attacks the enemy until he completely destroys the enemy. But now, there are not even scratches left on the so-called enemy. Yamada does not understand what is going on in the sorceress's head, because she studies magic with such passion and zeal. But now she does not demonstrate even half of her capabilities that she could. But maybe that doesn't make any sense. The guy says that he would also like to learn how to use magic, and not the abilities that he has now. And then Angelica asks what the problem is if he can master it. She looks at me blankly, raising an eyebrow and shrugging her shoulders. Then the main character is surprised and looks at the enchantress, because he does not understand what she is talking about. She asks again if the young man did not know about his ability to use magic, because he has it. Yamada recalls that in his system with the role of a holy knight, not only skills related to experience, protection, trust, storage are indicated, but also advanced light magic. Surprised, the guy puts his hand to his mouth, thinking to himself that this cannot be. Beads of sweat appear on the young man's face. He begins to justify that he was so busy with his grueling workouts that he forgot to look at his status window in the system. To this, Angie only smiles awkwardly, asking what kind of hellish training the boy had, snapping his fingers and exclaiming about an unexpected remembered detail. Once upon a time, the sorceress and the main character developed a rain spell together and, it turns out, the young man can also use it. The guy asks in surprise if this is true, but after that there is one more question. Yamada does not know how to use magic, because he is a beginner in this business, and Angelica gladly agrees to help the young man and explain everything in detail, because she knows some spells of light magic and may well teach the young man the basics. The girl explains that first of all, before starting to work with magic, you need to learn how to release magical power. And to do this, you need to clearly imagine the process in all details. And after that, the enchantress suggests that the guy try to do it. The main character is focused on the sword he holds in his hand and pulls it forward, trying to follow Angelica's words and clearly imagine how the magic of light flows into his sword. At this moment, the gun in the young man's hands lights up with a bright light. He squeezes it tighter and looks at the flames spreading over it with a surprised expression on his face. The young man realizes that everything worked out for him, following the instructions of the sorceress. The girl is happy for the success of the young man, saying that the most important thing is not to lose concentration. Admiring the sword, the guy says that now he looks exactly like a holy knight. The sorceress smiles, noting that the young man has a clearly manifested talent in magic. Ichiro Yamada stops Angelica from all the praise, saying that it's all about her, because the girl is a very good teacher. To this, the sorceress is very shy. Her cheeks turn red, and with her trembling voice, she asks the young man to stop embarrassing. The guy realizes that after so much effort, he has finally reached his goal, but he does not feel any joy at all. It seems like I got what I wanted, but it's still like it's not like that. At the same moment, The sword lights up brightly again and shines, soaring back into the air. The guy realizes that everything is starting again and therefore asks all the companions standing behind him to hide behind his back and not understanding what is happening again. A huge beam bursts out of the cannon and rapidly heads towards the side of the heroes, standing and looking at what is happening. The stream of light sparkles, whistling and flying out at breakneck speed. The young man purses his lips and thinks what kind of ray it is, and realizes that he cannot be stopped by an ordinary barrier. There is no time for doubts and unnecessary thoughts. You need to gather your strength and apply all your energy. The main character clenches his hand into a fist and throws it up sharply using a spell called Bastion, because he is obliged to stop the approaching ray before it finishes him and everyone else. A glow appears from the hero's hand, which later forms into a large circle, inside which there are 3 more circles, magic symbols, and the resulting magic triangle. This spell is capable of dispelling the magic of light, which the young man created together with Anji. The young man looks over his shoulder at the heroes and asks if they are okay, and only Alice Gladius says that everything is fine. The prince, hidden behind a magic shield, shouts that Yamada is procrastinating again and needs to deal with the enemy immediately, to which the young man replies about the need to close his mouth. Looking at the sword, the main character thinks that he was able to stop the attack this time, but is not sure that he will be able to cope next time, because he may not have enough strength. At the same moment, Alice notices something moving like a shadow towards her and the guy. Fear appears on Alice Gladius's face. Fear freezes in her eyes, and drops of sweat appear on her face. She calls the young man, saying that she knows who is in front of them now. The boss of the maze comes out of the shadows, in heavy armor, with 2 swords in his hands and a goat's head with horns. His silhouette is rapidly approaching the heroes. He does not utter a single word, but only his appearance strikes terror and fear into people's hearts. The boss of the maze, clearly hostile towards the heroes, snaps his fingers making a sound, and gradually bending his fingers into a strong fist. The main character and Alice Gladius look resolutely at the enemy in front of them. The girl closes her lips in a thin line. Drops of sweat appear on her face from the tension of the moment. Yamada screams, directing his focused gaze at the dungeon boss. Pointed blades appear behind the main character, rotating rapidly and capable of doing a lot of damage. You can hear their metallic clang and the characteristic sound of rotation. The young man hears some scuffling behind him but does not attach importance to it, concentrating on directing his gaze to the side. Turning towards the sound of the blades, a girl notices them and looks fearfully at how they are approaching closer and closer at a rapid speed, and then calls the young man, attracting his attention so that he can manage to dodge the blow. Each of the blades forms a semicircle and glows before soaring into the air and sparking with even greater force. Coming to his senses in time, Ichiro Yamada jumps away from the beam flying straight at him. The guy looks nervously at how the blade flew past him, realizing that he might not dodge the next one. He's not hit by a magic blade, but another one flies after him with such force and speed and as suddenly as the first one. Yamada looks fearfully at the enchanted blade approaching him. His eyes widen with fear and awareness of the whole situation. The young man covers his face with his hands while the rays are rapidly flying at him. He manages to defend himself from some of them, repel them with a sword blow. Wounds and bruises appear on the young man's face, as well as on his body. Some of the clothes are getting slightly shabby. At this moment, Alice stands up for the guy and tells the master to leave everything to her. The girl holds a sword in her hand and prepares to attack. But Yamada does not prevent this, because now he does not have the strength to continue fighting. The voice of the sorceress is heard from behind. The young man turns to look at him and watches as the girl casts a spell called Magic Rain. At the same time, the dungeon boss's spell is destroyed. A barrage of lightning strikes him. They sparkle, and the blades disappear. The prince praises the enchantress, puts his arm around her shoulders saying that she did a great job and tells her to continue in the same spirit. The girl smiles. She is pleased with the praise, so she informs that she will act as the hero orders her. But the young man notices that something is wrong here. Yamada realized that Anji's magic has become much weaker than before, but does not understand what happened to her. At the moment when the guy is distracted, a burning blade flies at him rapidly from behind. But the young man does not even feel it. At this moment, a bright blade pierces the guy's back. His mouth opens in a silent moan of pain. Yamada realizes that it was a terrible decision for him to get distracted by his thoughts. Losing his vigilance caused a serious injury. In addition to the stab in the back, another bright blade also strikes the arm, mercilessly cutting it off. For a second, the guy looks, not fully realizing what happened, and then screams shrilly, falling to the ground with his knees. Clutching his hand, the young man tries to stop the pouring blood and wheezes in pain. Mika looks at the main character, but does not take any action until Yamada, in a trembling voice, asks the girl to help him. After a moment of silence, the healer agrees, saying that this time she will cure. With a snort, the saint turns around, saying that the main character may not even dream of healing for the second time. She looks at him with contempt and clenches her palm into a fist, as if Yamada was not her friend and companion. The guy does not understand such a sharp and rapid change of character in a girl, because she has always been a real saint, ready at any moment to come and help the weak. The young man remembers in his head the image of a kind and joyful Mika, always smiling and able to heal any wounds. A loud scream breaks out of the young man's thoughts, informing him that it is necessary to form a barrier. Another blade flies at the sorceress and the saint. Both girls throw their hands forward, creating a holy barrier and a water barrier together. Two barriers form one large circle shield. But all the same, the actions performed do not help. The beam flies directly into the barrier, and the shield does not withstand the power of the impact, splitting into pieces. The saint looks fearfully at the ray flying at her, and realizes that this is the end. The enchantress holds the barrier created by the union of magic with all her might, but it cracks loudly. Yamada realizes that the barrier will not withstand such a strong blow, and at that moment he hears a scream caused by pain. Turning his head in the direction of the sound, the main character sees Alice hitting the blade. She covers the others from the blow. Yamada can't do anything about it. The girl gets a strong blow. Drops of blood and lacerations also appear on her clothes. The knight understands that if nothing is done right now, everyone will die, including the girls, who look in surprise at Alice, who took the blow. Their magic is not enough to defeat the monster, and Yamada himself has the strength. At this moment, Alice gets up from the pile of stones and immediately grabs her sword, reproaching her master, because she asked to leave the dungeon boss to her. The girl is confident in her abilities, and even when exhausted and wounded, she still takes up arms, being ready to strike back. And when the main character tries to stop the girl, she asks to believe in her, despite the fact that there are dried wounds on her face after the blow she received. The young man agrees, no longer contradicts Alice, saying that he believes in her, but he does not stay away either. The young man realizes that he is not alone. He has a great responsibility, and it is necessary to protect the rest of the guys from the squad. Now is not the right time to hesitate, so the main character uses a scattering spell, saying with determination in his voice that 7 seconds will be enough for him. Squeezing his fist tightly and imbuing it with energy, the guy shouts that he will use all his magical power to deal with the enemy, and after that, he applies the saint's combat enhancement spell on himself. The young man grabs his sword in his hand and, under the surprised gazes of the enchantress and the saint, begins to cut bright blades, counting in his head every second that he has until the end of the reinforcement effect. One by one, the stars of the blades disappear, and Yamada remains conscious with the last of his strength. The guy has 2 more seconds left, but one of the blows falls on the prince, who, unexpectedly, has tears in his eyes, and saliva sprays from his mouth. Luguin expected to just stand by while all the work was done for him. Stopping, the guy turns his back to the explosion and looks at the others while they are watching in surprise. He was able to cope, as he promised himself in the first place. At this moment, Prince Luguin says how he does not want to die and falls to the ground, scaring the enchantress and the saint. They immediately rush to the aid of their so-called hero, trying to bring him to his senses. Yamada notes that he overdid it a little, as it seems to him, but there is nothing he can do about it. After his victory, he looks towards Alice, wondering how she is now and what is going on. The girl stands in front of the dungeon boss, resolutely peering into the face of her opponent. The monster stands with his swords crossed, and also directs his gaze at the young girl, waiting for her to strike the first blow. The guy notices the dungeon monster and his girlfriend standing opposite each other. He looks shocked and scared, but does not interfere in their fight, deciding to trust Alice as she asked. The dungeon boss takes his first action. The monster takes the stance of the Knight Commander, changes the position of the legs, and places the sword vertically, without taking his eyes off his enemy. At the same moment, the monster swings its swords and strikes the first blow at Alice. But she, though with difficulty, reflects it. My strength still hadn't recovered from the last blow I took on myself. There wasn't time for that. The knight's hand is shaking. She looks fearfully at her palm, then at the opponent, realizing that the stance she saw earlier is different, and the movements are absolutely not similar to her father's actions. Breathing in more air into her lungs and squeezing the hilt of her sword tightly with her palms, the girl tries to calm herself, orders herself to concentrate in her head, so as not to let the monster deceive her. An image of her father appears before the girl's eyes, standing with a sword and preparing to attack. Alice realizes that if she loses, she will let the master down and undermine his trust, and this should not be allowed in any case. Raising her sword in the air, Alice screams that she swears by her honor as a knight that she will defeat the enemy, to which the dungeon boss only grins. Swinging with all her might, the girl uses a technique called a double incision, and instantly the boss's head flies off his sturdy shoulders. Alice turns her back on the lifeless body of her enemy. The only thing the monster said last before giving up the ghost were words of gratitude. The girl herself does not understand what they were for. She does not know what they thanked her for in the end. But with her trembling hands, she tightens her grip on her sword. Tears come to Alice's eyes. She breathes heavily and says in a trembling voice that everything worked out. The trust of her master will not be violated. Perhaps even more. Pride in the girl's success in battle will rise. Crying bitterly, either from pain or joy, Alice Gladius rushes into the arms of the young man, saying that the master's disciple was able to defeat a strong monster. The guy smiles, saying that the girl did well and did a good job, after which he pats her amiably on the top of her head, wiping tears from the eyes of a smiling girl. The main character offers to return home as soon as possible, since now the monster is over, and she gladly agrees, because there are enough adventures for today. The young man quickly runs to his companions from the squad, who are recovering from the battle, looking at them asking if they are okay. The guys are sitting in a small canyon and do not say anything, do not answer the main character's question, lowering their gaze. The prince sits thoughtfully, not looking at the young man. It seems to the main character that at first glance everything happens as usual, but in fact everything is absolutely not so. The guy tells the rest of the companions that he will now go down with Alice and help. Holding on to the protruding rocks, the guy looks towards his guys from the squad. He notes that the portal is still quite far away. Once in the canyon, Yamada runs up to the others as soon as possible and tells them not to strain themselves, and if the guys can't move, then he will help Alice too. While the guy was rushing to help Ryuguin, he again used a spell in secret from the young man. The shocked hero looks at the silhouette of his girlfriend disappearing ahead, who is walking towards Prince Ryuguin. The shocked hero looks at Alice's emotionless face, thinking that he will be able to return home only after 20 years, and even if there is an opportunity to return earlier, he will have to conquer dangerous labyrinths. Yamada imagined in his head the image of the prince hugging girls, and realized what a fool Ryuguin was, because he never even thought of helping him, behaving like a very bad person. The guy is very hurt by the realization of this, and there were many moments in his life when he wanted to give up everything. Run away. Despite all this, the main character was able to achieve a lot. He thought about Puffy, Micah, Angie, and Alice, because he had achieved a lot thanks to their support. At this moment, Knight Alice gets down on one knee and calls Ryuguin Lord a hero. After that, the girl who helped all the time called Yamada her master and was afraid to disappoint him, abruptly joined Prince Ryuguin. She got down on one knee in front of him, thus proving her loyalty, and called him Mr. Hero. Seeing how the knight asks the hero to serve him with truth and faith, all the hopes of the young man crumble, because everything repeats again, the same plot. There are tears in his eyes and in his thoughts. There is a feeling that everything is not real and it just seems to the young man. Ryuguin always takes away from a young man what is dear to him. And from the moment the girls met the prince, they completely changed, their character and behavior, and because of him, kind souls drowned in mud. Unable to withstand all this, The hero swings his weapon, and at the same moment the guy's head falls to the ground from his shoulders, loudly knocking against it. Meanwhile, a girl named Senna, sitting on the green grass, looks sadly at the sky, thinking about something of her own. She doesn't say a single word, just thinks about her own. The action shifts to the kingdom of Arcana, to the southern peaks of the hidden valley. Senna catches a pink butterfly on the tip of her finger and watches it until she hears a rustle and turns around at him. Passing behind bushes and trees closer to the path and the source of the blonde water, the girl sits down in front of the young man, examining him, carefully, not understanding where he is from. The main character is in serious condition, with bruises on his face. He is very tired and his breathing is almost imperceptible. The girl reaches out her hand to Yamada to touch him. Crouching in front of the main character, the girl looks at the body that has fallen senseless and touches someone else's cheek with her palm. Senna takes the young man's face in her hands and examines it. In the thoughts of the hero, while he is unconscious, events from the recent past come up. He realizes that he was mistaken, but does not understand at what point in time, when he took Alice into the maze, or when he took her into his group at all. The young man does not understand what he was fighting for back then. Events took on a different hue when the main character left Prince Ryuguin without a head. Then all three girls looked scared and disbelieving because how could Yamada do such a thing? In fact, the guy had long understood what kind of feelings were gnawing inside him, in his chest. But he decided to just ignore it. A few seconds later, the main character screams for Mika, and she asks in a trembling voice and with horror on her face what to do. Despite all that has happened, the young man asks the saint not to let the prince die, because not much time has passed, and it is still possible to heal him. Without answering anything, the healer immediately runs up to Ryuguin, hoping that the main character is right and he can really be saved. Bringing her hands to the guy's body, the girl whispers a spell, and a bright light illuminates everything around her. The healing is successful, and the saint informs the main character, who looks indifferently at the restored prince, that she is finished. The guy asks a direct question whether Mika is afraid of him, but she evades the answer, turns her head to the side, just not to look at the main character. And then the young man realizes that the silence of the girl is also the answer. The saint holds Prince Ryuguin, who is not fully recovered, in her arms. And then the guy makes an unexpected proposal. The main character suggests to Mika to use the spell of the world law, the purpose of which will be him, Ryuguin, and all three girls in the dungeon. Realizing what Yamada wants to do, the girl forms a spell. She closes her eyes and a golden glow appears from her hands, after which the scales of justice are formed in the air. The main character asks the created scales to direct the lives of all those present to one bowl, and in contrast to ask for another to take care of all the girls for themselves. Each of them looks surprised, realizing where everything is going. Addressing each of the girls, Yamada asks Anji to be faithful to magic, Miku asks to continue saving other people's lives, and Alice to train hard and become the best knight, after which the hero turns back to the scales of justice. All the requests he had said earlier were so smug. The young man only wanted the girls' desires to be fulfilled, and all for the sake of his own selfishness. But he really liked each of them. But the hero can no longer hide his feelings, nor can he do anything. Mika casts a spell, whispering that the truth cannot be hidden in front of the face of God. Light and darkness are located in the stream of wisdom. Asking to consolidate and bind the oath, the girl watches as the scales light up. The saint informs that the conclusion of the oath is concluded, and at this moment the scales disappear. Perhaps, as the main character himself thinks, the girls decided of their own free will to become like this. He will never know the truth anyway. Pushing Mika and Alice in the shoulder, Yamada runs where his feet lead him, where his eyes look. He is breathing heavily, has not recovered from his injuries, but he realized only one thing for himself. When he leaves, most likely, the paths of the girls and his own will never cross again. It was their last meeting. The young man runs into the very depths of the forest, at full speed, promising that he will not come back again, and will not dismiss his decisions. Now he won't be able to trust anyone. He won't have the strength to do that. Mistakenly, the main character thought that the girls he met liked him. Mistakenly, the main character thought that the girls he met liked him. The guy thinks about hating himself. How could he ever trust others so excessively, and blames himself for his lack of experience in communicating with others? Looking with a doomed look, the main character still feels like he is chopping off the prince's head. This picture did not leave his head. It was completely fixed. Breathing heavily, the hero looks up to the sky, thinking that he must disappear, run away to a place where no one can find him. But he does not know where to go. He will be a stranger everywhere. As you know, a person cannot survive alone, so the guy runs to the southern peaks of the hidden valley. He needs at least someone so as not to be left alone. After some time, stopping and trying to catch his breath, the young man looks around, asking himself what kind of place this is, because it is unknown whether it is a forest or mountains, and there are no landmarks. Standing knee-deep in tall grass, the main character calms himself, saying that although it is dangerous in the wild, everything is not so terrible if you are in a maze now. Gritting his teeth, the guy decides to keep walking. The young man has no other choice but to run on until he finds another place. But, unfortunately, determination is eliminated by an unpleasant fall. Yamada slips and falls on his back, screaming loudly in pain. Crying out in pain, the guy rubs his bruised back with his palm, hoping that this can somehow help him. Looking around, he realizes that he has already walked quite a lot, but is still in the mountains. There is no road in sight, and the realization of where to move on has not come. At this moment, a saber-toothed boar attacks the main character from behind with a wild roar. The young man is visibly trembling, trying to dodge the impact of his paws. There is no way to escape. There is only one thing left: to fight. The boar does not wait, immediately pounces on the guy with its hooves and growls angrily. At this moment, the young man defends himself from being hit by a massive tusk with his sword, gathering the remnants of his strength together. But the sword breaks under the onslaught of a dangerous beast. The guy looks hopelessly at the broken weapon and at his opponent, realizing that now he doesn't even have anything to defend himself with. Then the guy decides to use his last chance in the form of magic, but he doesn't succeed either. Falling to one knee, the young man thinks what the problem is: lack of strength or depleted mana supply. But at this moment, the beast that wants to attack does not wait, and with its large tusk, hits the young man so hard that he flies several meters forward from the force of the push, tumbling and bumping in flight several times. The main character lands on the coccyx at full speed and ends up in a deep pit. He rubs his back in pain, clutches his side, and groans from the unpleasant fall. After that, the guy realizes with horror what kind of situation he is in. Raising his eyes to the sky, Yamada realizes that the boar has not left yet, and therefore decides to stay in this pit until the huge boar is distracted by another goal. The main character closes his eyes tightly, and in his mind begs the wild animal to leave as soon as possible. The guy, still sitting in the pit, raises his head to the sky, no longer hearing anything but the sound of retreating footsteps. Then the young man decides to get out of his hole and look around. He grabs the rocks with hands trembling with fatigue, and after that pulls his head out only half to check if the animal is definitely gone. Yamada sees 3 mushrooms in front of him. Some of them are big, some are smaller. He is surprised that there is anything to eat in this place. The guy's stomach immediately starts rumbling. He feels hungry and does not know how long it has been since he ate anything. Yamada greedily looks at. The guy doesn't know if it's okay to eat the mushrooms in front of him, but he's hungry so much that the sounds from his stomach are like howling. Although it is dangerous, he decides to try the mushroom anyway, as he needs to eat something and fill his stomach. The young man thinks that there is no way out because he got hungry one day, so the sounds from his stomach were like an animal howl. The guy picks one of the mushrooms and brings it to his mouth, enthusiastically saying that it's time to try. Even though it's dangerous, he needs something to eat. But less than a couple of seconds pass as the young man begins to burn in his mouth. The guy sticks his tongue out, drops of sweat appear on his face. His whole face is burning. His consciousness is slightly cloudy. Tears drip from the eyes. Copious amounts of saliva are released, and the face turns red from the sharpness. The young man thinks what a spicy mushroom tastes like. Yamada urgently needs water and, fortunately, there is a pond near him. Having collected mountain water in the palm of his hand, the young man drinks it, thinking that the rocks could have cleaned it long ago. And it does not taste disgusting, even more. The water is delicious, so the main character scoops a little more into his palms. But after a few hours, abdominal pain still makes itself felt. The stomach rumbles, and drops of sweat appear on the forehead of the main character. But he continued to walk. So, He wandered for about a month, surviving in the wild. In a month, the young man has already got used to living in this forest, but he tries not to relax. The strange thing for him is that since that moment, he has never met a boar. The other monsters were not so dangerous, and even if he met the enemy now, he would still be able to defeat them. The guy hasn't eaten properly for a long time. His stomach is still rumbling, but he tries to ignore this feeling of hunger and move on. Hiding in the grass, Yamada notices something that looks like a tree. Pressing the grass with his hand, the young man looks at the tree in front of him in surprise, realizing that he has finally found food. There are fruits on it. But remembering the case of spicy mushrooms, the guy is a little afraid to eat them. But he hopes for his luck, and suddenly this time, everything will go much better than last time. The young man looks closely at the fruits, realizing that they are very similar to the akibi from his native world, and decides to try it anyway, regardless of the possible consequences of eating food. After taking the first bite, the guy chews the food carefully and realizes that it tastes sweet, and now he has hit the jackpot, because he has a lot of food. Picking up 2 fruits, he chews each of them, crying with joy. For a long time, the main character has not eaten anything tasty and normal, and in order to fill that brutal hunger, he eats as much as possible without even chewing the food thoroughly. But abruptly, at one point, the stomach cramps with pain, the body begins to go numb, and it becomes more difficult to breathe. Only one thing sounds like a toxin in his thoughts. Yamada will die here, and no matter how he tries to get up, because monsters can come at any moment, he cannot do it. After lying like that for a while, the guy hears someone's footsteps and with the last of his strength, looks up at the silhouette passing by him, thinking where the man came from. And before him appeared not some kind of ghostly phantom, but a beautiful girl. Being almost unconscious, Yamada feels a light touch from a stranger and quiet words on the periphery of his consciousness. She's glad that the guy is still alive, and now she will take care of him. Opening his eyes after losing consciousness, the first question that arises in the hero's head sounds like, "What is this place, and what happened?" He is not in the forest, not in the mountains, but, judging by the appearance, in some kind of wooden house. He does not understand whose voice he is hearing and whose silhouette he sees in front of him. But he cannot even lift a finger from impotence. The girl next to him lifts the still unconscious guy slightly behind his back and looks at him. Suddenly, the stranger kisses the guy on the lips, grabbing him by the neck and pressing him closer to himself. And he does not pull away, clings closer, perhaps without realizing what he is doing, while still unconscious. The guy begins only after a few seconds to feel the kiss and the bitter taste of someone else's lips on his own. His eyes widen instantly. He mentally asks to wait and stop, mumbles into the girl's mouth, but she does not stop. Tongues intertwine, the girl passes the medicine to the guy through a kiss. Yamada can only rest his hands and mumble insistently. In the guy's mind, there is a desire to stop it. On the tongue, the main character still feels something bitter, terrible to taste, and it looks like medicine. Opening his eyes wider in horror, Yamada realizes that through a kiss, a beautiful stranger could have given him a pill or some medicinal herbs. Finally, pulling away, the guy finally regains consciousness, seeing a clear image of the girl in front of him. Gradually, his strength returns to him, and the kiss, which lasted for several seconds, was the first in the life of the main character. To dilute the situation, the girl that the guy saw in the mountains before he finally passed out says that Yamada almost died, and if she hadn't found him then, he would have been in the next world. The young man cannot utter a word. Not a single sound comes out of his mouth. And the girl, realizing this, says that this condition is quite normal for someone who has been unconscious for almost a week. All this time, Senna took care of the main character, and he tries to say something again, but the girl stops him, gently stroking his hot cheek with her palm. She had no malicious intentions, and since the guy couldn't move, she kept giving the necessary medicines all the time, touching the tip of her nose to a stranger. The stranger asks the guy to discard all unnecessary thoughts and just relax, gain strength. He's safe now, and there's nothing to worry about. So the main character met a snow-white girl. Kissing her was a shocking event. So some time passed, The young man's voice returned and, being confused, he finds out all the details from Senna. While he was unconscious, the girl gave him medicines because he himself could not drink them. And this happened precisely through a kiss. Yamada's face instantly turns red, like a tomato. He thinks that Senna saved his life, and he did this to her, even though she just wanted to help and save the guy's life. The main character is still looking directly at the girl, but she does not understand what the problem is. Assuming that it's the newly risen temperature, the stranger puts the young man back in bed and covers him with a blanket, saying that, since he feels bad, it's worth getting some sleep. Meanwhile, the young man is trying to get all thoughts out of his head. Just forget about them. And so 2 weeks pass. A snow-white stranger fed the young man soups, helped him walk when he had no strength, and thanks to the invaluable support of Senna, the main character was completely cured and was able to get back on his feet. Another morning has come, starting this time with words of immense gratitude from the guy. Senna holds a mug of hot tea in her hands and directs her gaze at the speaker. The girl did not consider her help to be anything special, and just waved it off, continuing to drink her drink. At this moment, the young man remembers that in all these days, he had not even introduced himself. Smiling broadly, the main character pronounces his name. His name is Ichiro Yamada, but to Senna, he may just be Ichiro. The girl says the guy's name again and looks at him. She puts a mug of hot tea on the table. The main character finds out that the girl's name is Senna, but she doesn't tell anything more about herself. Where you came from, how you found the hero. All this remains a mystery. Surprised by such an unusual name, the guy says that it is incredibly beautiful and wants to ask to stay in her house for a while longer, but immediately stops. He doesn't know why he's still here if he's fully recovered. In the kingdom, most likely, the guy was declared a criminal for harming the hero, and because of this, Ichiro is afraid that he will cause trouble to a new acquaintance, and it would be better for him to leave. But she seems to read the thoughts of the main character. Suddenly, Senna says that she doesn't care at all, and Yamada can stay here as long as he wants. Apparently, she does not live in this house, since she is ready to give it to a stranger for a long time. The young man has tears in his eyes. He apologizes and thanks the girl for the permission. Then he lost everything, did not know where to go, because everywhere he would be a stranger, and faith in people was lost. But it was next to the Sen that he felt that he could still trust someone again. Going out into the courtyard, the main character inspects the hut, while Senna goes about his business and decides to ask a strange question. As it seems to him, who owns this house, and what kind of place it is? The girl is holding a basket of vegetables in her hands and really does not understand what this question was about. Then, to smooth out an uncomfortable pause, the young man begins to apologize, saying that he shouldn't have asked at all. The young man raises his head, looking at the roof of the house. The girl follows his example. Yamada was just wondering who built the hut here, where all the furniture and dishes came from. The guy is surprised that there is a house so far away, so he decided to ask. Sighing heavily, Senna replies that the house was built by her teacher. But when the main character tries to find out more about this very teacher, the girl does not answer anything, most likely, as the young man suggests, not wanting to talk about him. Perhaps something unpleasant even happened to her. Senna continues to tell that the house is made of a multifaceted demonic tree, and no matter how scary, in Yamada's opinion, this name does not sound. The girl hurries to calm down, saying that this monster is weak. He made a lot of noise in his time, so she and the teacher killed him. The multifaceted tree drew all the vital and magical energy from the soil, and in fact, all the dishes in the house were made of this monster, and the futon and clothes that the guy is now wearing on his body are made of the threads of a demonic silkworm. The guy immediately looks around and hiccups in fright. The girl explains the demonic silkworm babies secrete a lot of threads, so they are easy to assemble. The main character did not even think that this material could be used in this way. Taking the basket of vegetables to the house, Senna says that Ichiro has not fully recovered yet, and as soon as he finishes washing, he should go and rest. He nods and gets back to work. It's getting late at night outside. Before going to bed, the young man thinks that he needs to regain his strength as soon as possible, and pulls the blanket tighter over himself. At the same moment, he feels a kind of swarming next to him. Opening his eyes, Ichiro sees a girl lying down next to him. He immediately asks what she is doing, and Senna answers briefly and simply. She is going to sleep with him. And no matter how the main character tries to get away from this offer, it was a statement that Senna does not want to discuss. Waking up accidentally at night, the young man gets out of bed, noticing that his companion is missing, and she is not in the house. After searching the rooms, the guy starts to worry, because the girl disappeared in the middle of the night. Going outside, the main character hears the creak of the front door opening and looks to see if anyone is nearby. But apart from the noise of the wind, he hears nothing. Yamada enjoys the pleasant night breeze until he sees a strange, bright glow in the depths of the forest. He decides to go to him and check it out. In the forest, he meets Sen. She is spinning in a dance. Sparks and air currents gather around her. She does not notice the young man next to her, in harmony with nature in the air. Sinking to the ground, the girl turns around and still notices Ichiro standing not so far away in the bushes. She asks what the guy is doing here. The main character did not interfere with the process. He was embarrassed and his cheeks turned red. The young man only said softly that he could not even express in words the beauty of what he had just seen. The girl explains that this is how she expresses her gratitude to God, because he is always there and protects everyone around. It's the least that can be done for all his hard work. It is also a ritual to comfort a god who is mired in demonic energy. Raising her hand to the sky, the girl points somewhere into the void. While the main character tries to realize what he has heard, Senna also adds that her little dance was aimed at protecting God. Ichiro notes for himself that the girl does not tell much about it, but he sees how important this ritual is for her. Perhaps she has her own special mission in this world. Conversations about gods and rituals are interrupted by Senna's sudden desire to eat a rice omelet for breakfast, and the guy agrees to cook it when he returns back to the hut. As Ichiro promised, he prepared a delicious breakfast for the girl in the form of an omelet. While she is chewing with appetite, the main character says that she is already on the mend and will be able to fully heal very soon. After chewing the food, Senna puts her fist to her chest, asking to leave everything to her. She promises to persistently take care of the guy, but he is very embarrassed, and now he is worried not for himself, but for the girl, although most likely, these worries are unnecessary. After breakfast, the girl begins to teach the guy some techniques that she knows herself. She tells the young man to lower his hips lower, focus on his stomach, and remember that the most important thing is proper breathing. The breath should go from the abdomen to the legs, then to the head and fingertips. It needs to be felt, to understand how it spreads throughout the body. And everything sounds reasonable, but the guy does not understand what is meant by energy. Having asked this question, what is energy? The young man gets a concise and not entirely clear answer, so he suggests that the girl demonstrate herself. Then he would be able to understand. But this only infuriates her. Looking at the main character with displeasure, Senna says in a harsh tone that energy is energy, which may be incomprehensible. She also assumes that the guy does not like the way she teaches him, but he immediately backs down, saying that Senna is a great teacher and he wants to learn from her. Kneeling down, as a sign of respect and apology, Ichiro asks to continue, and Senna agrees. That's how the hero's training began. After a few weeks, he even began to feel the same energy that was mentioned earlier. During one of these workouts, the guy asks if such methods will help him recover his strength. Chuckling, Senna replies that by continuing to train, he will be able to regain his former strength, and even gain a new one. The conversation is interrupted by the sound of rustling in the bushes. The main character bulges his eyes in fright, suggesting what it might be. He remembers that his encounter with the monster also began with the usual rustling in the bushes. All expectations were fulfilled. The young man shouts that this is the monster he once met in the mountains. In front of the hero stands a huge boar, clearly angry, dissatisfied, and wanting to attack right now. Throwing her hand forward, Senna says that she will deal with him herself. But Yamada does not want to let her do this, because what can such a little girl do to such a huge monster boar? But, to the surprise of the young man, Senna copes well with the monster, dodges his every blow, saying that this is energy. What she's been teaching the guy all this time. Choosing the right moment, when the boar has finally exhausted its reserve of strength, the girl runs up to him and uses a spell called Destruction. At the same moment, a bright light appears from her palm, and the wild animal itself stops all attempts to strike. After one such spell, the animal falls into a blackout, and Senna only looks at him menacingly, while the main character is surprised by the powers of a little girl. With just one punch, she was able to end the monster once and for all. In fact, there was not even a blow. The girl just touched the boar, and after that he fell dead, raising clouds of dust behind him. Confused, the young man asks if Senna could overcome such a huge thing with a light touch of her hand. There is only one answer to all questions: energy. Turning around and walking away towards the house, the girl says that this boar is enough for breakfast, and also adds that the whole strength of the guy used to depend solely on skills. However, such strength is not real. Continuing to explain, Senna says that this very force of itself is worthless, and no matter how the young man tries to deny it, he is very weak now. And it's not just about exhaustion after a month of hiking in the mountains. Gritting his teeth, the main character makes a promise to himself and the girl that he will definitely cope and master the energy. He wants to be strong. He wants to regain his former strength in order to go on new adventures. Exhaling heavily, the girl continues to say that, first of all, Yamada should learn to feel energy with every cell of her body. He asks again what this means, because it is not very clear what is meant by this. But the answer is still as short: try to figure it out on your own. Breathing heavily, after numerous attempts, Ichiro gives up, saying that everything is useless and he seems to be missing something. Hei helps to understand what prevents a guy from mastering energy: the lack of proper breathing. To feel all this energy inside your body, you need to learn how to breathe properly, master breathing techniques, and then things will get better and training will begin to take place faster. Conducting further study, Senna tells the guy to close his eyes, breathe calmly and deeply to feel the energy lurking inside himself. Having listened to his teacher, the main character does so. Everything around the guy is colored in black and white. The foliage on the trees turns white, and the ground turns dark. The main character concentrates, breathes deeply through his nose and exhales through his mouth. And he gets out. Some sensations appear inside the body, and the young man forces himself to remember this. Finally, he realizes how to breathe properly. He clenches his hands tightly into fists and feels an aura accumulating around him that cannot be seen just by looking. But at some point, there is simply not enough breath. The young man breaks off and, trembling a little, falls to one knee, coughing and coming to his senses. Suddenly, Senna praises the main character because he was able to cope. She asks how he feels after the incident. The guy replies that it's not bad, but he can't even move right now. Then Senna explains that the feeling of energy is just the basis of all the basics, and then you need to learn how to circulate it through your body. For the main character, these words sound like a joke. He barely managed to feel the energy in his body, but nevertheless, he does not voice his arguments, only squeezes his fist tighter and promises to do so. This is how learning to manage your energy begins. The guy trained hard every day. During the day, Senna conducted training sessions for him, in which he tried his best to master and not lose the ability to control energy. When he and the girl were hungry, Senna went hunting. One day she appeared in front of the guy, holding the skin of a wild animal. It seemed surprising to the young man, but from the look on Senna's face, it seemed that there was nothing special about her hunting. One day, the main character went in search of food, but it did not end very well, because all the food he brought did not fit. The guy showed the mushroom he brought to the blonde girl, but she just shook her head and said that such food was not suitable for them. Sometimes the main character still has free time, and one day, when the weather was just terrible and it was raining, Yamada suggested Senna spend the day off and not go anywhere. She agrees, believing that rest is also part of training. Smiling happily, the young man now thinks about what he should do on a day free from studying and getting food. In the hut, the main character notices bookshelves and asks his teacher if he can read them. Senna replies that yes, because these books were left by her mentor, and therefore you can take them at any time. Judging by the spines, each of these books describes other worlds. Reading each of the names, the young man notices that they are quite strange. One of the books is called The Tale of a Night, the other is A Dream of Love, and another is a romantic story. Pulling out another book, the guy sees the title Kiss of Love and immediately pushes it back, embarrassingly giving out to Senna's question that nothing happened. Perhaps not all of this fiction tells about worlds, but still, the main character puts forward the last of the books again, saying that it looks interesting. The title, Kiss of Love, is on the cover. And when Senna says that she likes this book too, the guy decides to read it. Senna's teacher left many different books. Almost every one of them has a little information about this world. Myths, history, labyrinths, and magic. During a long reading, the guy does not even notice how long hours pass. At some point, the girl falls asleep right on the shoulder of the main character. He just smiles softly, seeing this picture, forgetting how nice it is to just pass the time and do nothing. The day spent with Senna never let the guy get bored. A few days later, as she trained, Senna talked more about energy and finally, feeling her, the main character began to look at magic in a different way. The girl increasingly praised the young man, saying that he was doing well. He, of course, denied everything, because he had not made any progress in the circulation of energy. But Senna replies that it is not worth rushing, and it seems only the hero was happy, when suddenly the girl changes her mind, saying that Ichiro is too slow. While in the hut, the main character is also responsible for cooking. He leaves Senna to work on removing blood from the recaptured carcasses, because he does not know how to do this himself. Every dish prepared by Yamada looks delicious. Sometimes the young man remembers those terrible days, how he escaped, how he got lost on the mountain, and it was just terrible. But time passed, and now he's almost the blonde girl's personal chef. Carrying the plates in his hands, the guy informs that the food is ready and serves it to the table. Senna admires because the guy's cooking skills are getting better every time. She says that everything looks pretty tasty and thanks the main character for the cooked food. Picking up the chopsticks, the girl mumbles with pleasure, saying that the taste is simply excellent, and Ichiro is surprised by such an appetite. He asks again if Senna does not have to eat so much rice, and she mumbles affirmatively, and the young man tries to find out why she eats so much. In response to this, nothing should be done, in fact. The girl does not need food, and apparently it is enough for her to simply absorb natural energy every night. However, eating alone is quite boring, and even if Senna does not need ordinary human food, Ichiro would prefer to dine only in pleasant company with her. Awkwardly rubbing the back of his head, the young man says that he did not eat much himself, and all the rice ended up in the girl's stomach. She blows her lips with displeasure because, in her opinion, she, along with the main character, ate equally, but he objects, offering to look at the number of plates next to her, as many as 10 pieces, and at his unfortunate 1 plate. For a young man, it is still surprising that Senna obviously ate more than 1 kilogram of rice, and how such a thing can fit in a young girl is still a mystery. A divine light emanates from a snow-white girl. You even have to close your eyes from its power. Senna says that she never lies and that she wants to eat more, so she asks her roommate to cook more sweets. The main character is surprised at how much he can fit in the hay. She doesn't even get enough of such volumes. The ingredients in the house are very limited, but last time the guy cooked sweets for the girl, she was just overjoyed and quickly ate everything. Agreeing, the guy points to a shelf with cooking ingredients, saying that there are not enough of them for sweets, so he can only cook a pie, and this option suits the girl quite well. After a while, a jam pie appears on the plate, crispy and freshly baked. Senna looks at him admiringly, already wanting to taste the food as soon as possible. Thanking the young man for his efforts, Senna picks up a spoon and breaks a piece of pie, sending it into her mouth. She really likes the taste of the prepared sweets, and she wants to eat even more. Smiling, Ichiro says that if they had apples in their house, they would be able to make an apple pie. The girl asks the main character again about the pie because she has never tasted it before, but now her appetite is running high. Laughing happily, the guy says that he will definitely cook it as soon as he finds apples, if they, of course, grow in these places. Holding out her little finger, the girl asks to promise that the young man will cook the same pie, and it is at this moment that moments from the past pop up in the guy's head when those girls from his squad also promise to be there and help. But none of this happened. Although the main character hesitantly holds out his little finger, he still seals it together with his teacher, thus promising to fulfill his oath. One day, the guy had a bad dream. He found himself in a long, familiar room, similar to an inn near the second maze, where he'd already been. Standing in the center of an empty room, with a made-up bed and an empty table, the young man remembers that Mika and Anji went to Prince Luguin, which is why it is so empty and heavy here now. In the guy's head, even though he didn't want to. Mika's face, imprinted in his memory, pops up, saying that he promised to cook her an apple pie. Probably. This memory was connected with the words of the Sen, uttered during the day. The young man remembers how all the girls were friends without this Prince Ryuguin. They wanted to go through the mazes together, that's what he thought. And one day, he brought a pie to Mika. Seeing this, Ryuguin snorts with displeasure, saying that he hates sweets and simply demands that the cooked product be removed. But in the thoughts of the main character, it slips that he cooked and brought this pie not for the prince. The one for whom the pastry was intended snorts in the same way, turns up her nose, saying that the hero is right, and she also hates sweets. There is only one word in the young man's head: a lie. Everything that was said now was not true. Reluctantly, Prince Ryuguin decides to try a piece, since the guy brought it. After taking a bite, the prince grimaces, saying that the food is incredibly sweet, and it is impossible to eat the pie, since cinnamon is also in it. Covering his mouth so that he doesn't throw up right here, Ryuguin demands to get rid of him. Mika angrily shouts at the knight, saying that if the hero gets sick, Ichiro will be punished accordingly. She calls him an idiot, asks what to do now, and is going to go to the prince. As soon as the young man tries to justify himself, he gets hit on the cheek. Mika demands to get rid of the garbage immediately, as she calls the pie, and apologizes to the hero for his thoughtless act. Holding back tears and clenching his teeth, Yamada looks at the pie line, when beautiful and lush, on the floor. All his efforts went to waste. They were not appreciated by the one for whom he tried, so he has no choice but to apologize, even though he was not to blame for anything. Waking up from a nightmare with tears in his eyes, the main character is breathing heavily. He didn't want to think about his old band, about what happened back in the dungeon, so he tried not to think about them. But his subconscious played a cruel joke on him. But nevertheless, tears fall from the guy's eyelashes. He clenches his teeth so as not to cry harder. At such moments in his nightmares, no matter how he tries to escape from them, he still remembers. As soon as Senna sees the young man awake, she runs up to him and holds out her hand. She tries to calm him down, wipes the tears from his burning cheeks and hugs him tightly, whispering gently in his ear that everything is fine and he is safe next to her. Out of frustration, the young man does not say anything and only snuggles closer to the girl's shoulder, closes his eyes, and ponders the nightmare he saw. It so happened that the hero fell asleep again. And this time, he wakes up not in a cold sweat, but in the warm embrace of the Sen, with his nose buried in her chest. This makes it awkward and even somehow uncomfortable, so the young man tries to jump out of bed. The girl wakes up and sleepily wishes good morning to Yamada. Senna is lying with her head on the pillow. She put her hands under it and covered herself with a blanket on top. The young man hesitantly wishes good morning in return. Sitting up, Senna stretches lazily after sleeping on her bed. She says that she is very hungry, and this also comes as a surprise to the hero, because it is only morning. The guy thinks about the fact that Senna treats him as usual, but the girl pulls him out of these reflections, bringing a plate to his face and asking him to cook breakfast as soon as possible. The rumbling belly of the blonde girl reports that she is incredibly hungry. Then the main character argues out loud that there are still eggs left from them. You can cook a delicious omelet. Such a breakfast suits the girl perfectly, and she agrees to wait a little. After breakfast, long and exhausting workouts continue. Senna asks you to do more than last time. Hold your breath for a longer period, and the guy really tries. The bright sun shines outside the walls of the house, leaving no shadow in which to hide from the rays. Mountains are visible in the distance, and very close is the forest in which the main character trains. Nevertheless, the young man gives up, falling to the ground from impotence. No matter how hard I try, I can't get any further. But the girl still praises him, saying that he is a great fellow and makes more progress each time compared to previous workouts. Sarah looks at the main character intently. The girl's hair is beautifully blown in the wind. Ichiro is breathing heavily. His whole body is shaking with fatigue, and he wipes the sweat from his face with his hand. The guy says that he has figured out how to channel energy through his body and considers it a good result. Sarah thinks she teaches well. A faint smile appears on her face. The girl raises one finger up and, looking at him, says that as a reward she will show him one technique. After a while, the main character talks to himself about the fact that sky wolves live in this part of the forest, and he needs to catch one of them and bring scene. In front of Ichiro is a dark thicket of the forest. The main character hides behind one of the large tree trunks and stealthily looks out from there. There is concern on his face. He thinks that the girl is right. The guy thinks about the wolves in the clearing. There's a whole pack of them. He argues that the ability to fly will cause a lot of problems. They attack packs like ordinary wolves. The guy talks about how he can catch at least one. Suddenly, he shouts very loudly that it annoys him. As expected, the wolves hear his cry as he is standing quite close to them. The monster immediately reacts to a stranger in their territory, but the main character thinks faster and is the first to attack, raising his fist to strike with a belligerent cry. Ichiro will kill a flying wolf on the head with all his might, but at the same second he freezes in surprise. The guy thinks that the attack was strange and thinks that he put energy into his fist. He doesn't have time to think, because the monster starts a counterattack. The main character does not immediately notice the ray flying at him. The wolf unleashes a devastating attack from its mouth, but Ichiro manages to dodge and, pushing off the ground, hit the wolf with his head with all his might. The guy immediately grabs the wolf comfortably by the fur and throws it away from him with all his might. The main character celebrates his victory by pointing an outstretched fist at the sky. Not far from him lies a defeated opponent. However, there is another flying wolf next to him. The main character looks at him with tension and shouts at the monster that is going to attack him to follow him. After a while, Ichiro runs out of the dark forest and stops near a stone. The guy turns to Senna and shouts to her that the wolf is already on the way. The girl who is sitting on top of the stone absolutely calmly tells him to come here. The guy does not understand what the girl wants from him and looks in her direction in surprise. She urges him not to stop and hide behind a stone. The main character is a little perplexed by her words, but agrees. The wolf only notices the trap he finds himself in at the last minute. A moment later, blood gushes out of his mouth. The main character looks at it in surprise. He wonders to himself what happened, since she didn't even touch the wolf. The monster falls to the ground in twitches and convulsions. Senna calmly comes out from behind the stone and explains to the main character that the person who taught her this technique called it a spatial strike. Ichiro looks at her in surprise. The guy immediately gets an epiphany, and he says that he realized that the girl forced the energy to pass through the stone and hit the wolf. He also tries to express a theory, but the girl cuts him off and says that he thinks correctly. Senna closes her eyes and says that she caused the energy to fluctuate greatly inside the wolf's body, which led to his death. She says that this technique does not depend on strength or skills. This is what she considers to be the true power. Ichiro is surprised. After the main character saw the spatial impact, he realized what he should strive for. Right now, Ichiro doesn't want to think about anything else because he has lost too much and doesn't want to relive such an experience. However, the main character has one problem. The guy looks at the empty bucket in disbelief. He thinks it's strange because there was plenty of food in the morning and wonders where it all went. The girl is no less worried and asks what they will do. Sarah quickly turns away from him and walks in the opposite direction. The girl says that she seemed to have a magic bag. She wants to check if there's anything left and asks a friend to wait. The main character opens his eyes in surprise and wonders to himself, thinking about the situation. His gaze comes across an old battered bag lying on the table. He reflects that there is nothing left at all, looking at the empty table in front of him. Suddenly, Ichiro notices a strange object on the table. He picks up a stone and wonders to himself what kind of stone it is and where it came from. The main character does not want to focus on this and suggests that the girl go to the city and shop there, to which Sarah suddenly exclaims very loudly, objecting to a friend. He turns his head in her direction in surprise and asks why she suddenly says that. The girl presses her hands to her chest and says it doesn't matter. Sarah insists that she does not need food, but the young man says that he needs to eat too. The girl's appearance suggests that she is very tense. She looks pleadingly at the main character and says that they will be able to find meat on the hunt, and they will collect vegetables in the forest. Ichiro looks at her a little in disbelief and holds his hands out in a conciliatory gesture. The guy is surprised by her words because she liked the food and offers to just stock up on supplies. He is about to leave, but the girl grabs him by the edge of his clothes at the last moment and calls his name with an excited look. Sarah insists on his own and says that he is not in the best condition right now. The girl is worried about him. The main character asks her not to worry, but she exclaims loudly again. Suddenly, Ichiro has a hunch why she's acting like this. He recalls recent events when a girl comforted him at night and slept with him. The main character continues to dissuade her. The guy calms Sarah, who continues to hold his clothes, and says that everything will be fine. He would just buy them food. Ichiro tells her that he will be back as soon as he finishes. Sarah lets go of the hem of his shirt and agrees with the main character. The girl's appearance betrays her embarrassment at the situation. After a while, the main character, who has already gathered, is going to go out to the city to buy groceries. Sarah asks him if he took the food, to which Ichiro responds positively. The girl does not stop asking questions and clarifies about the water, to which she receives the same answer. She looks at him a little worried, sighing. There is a slight blush on her face, and her hands are folded in a lock. The main character can't stand her appearance and exclaims loudly, urging her to stop worrying so much about him. Ichiro tries to reach the girl and says that he fixed the armor she gave him. Also, the guy with a smile on his face remembers the magic bag that she gave him. The girl looks down with a little excitement on her face. Sarah is still worried about the main character and worries that he might get into trouble. She folds her hands back into the lock and closes her eyes. The girl complains that she cannot leave the mountains, although she really wants to always be with him. Ichiro is very touched by this, and he puts his hand on her head and strokes Sarah. The young man thanks her head and strokes Sarah. The young man thanks her. He smiles at her with all sincerity and asks the girl not to be bored. A barely noticeable blush appears on his face, and he tells her that he will definitely bring a gift. Sarah anxiously asks her friend to be careful and tells him that she will be waiting for him. He walks out of the house with a determined look and says that he is on his way. After a while, the main character moves with great speed through the forest. Ichiro knows all the paths in these places, so it won't be difficult for him to get down. First, he's going to find a stone with a mark, and then he has to walk quite a bit to the road. The young man is relieved to find a marked boulder and immediately discovers a road, walking along which he will surely find good cities. There is an excellent landscape in front of Ichiro. The main character is going to go to the city of Balduff and immediately notices how well maintained the road is. The guy concludes that the people here are good guys. Suddenly, his gaze stares at nothing and tears come to his eyes. However, the main character immediately pulls himself together and wipes the moisture from his eyes. Ichiro demands to get himself together and thinks that he no longer wants to hide. The guy is thinking that he needs more information, when suddenly he notices something strange in the distance. In the middle of the road, he sees an overturned carriage and a couple of people near it. He hides behind one of the trees not far from the men. Ichiro is surprised that there are people here. The guy hears about how one of the men discusses the girl and says that she is a good product. The main character realizes with horror that they are kidnapping a man. One of the bandits throws the girl onto his shoulder and urges the other to hurry up. The main character has to save an unknown girl who is attacked by bandits. To begin with, he uses fog to reduce the men's field of vision. The bandits are very surprised. One of them wonders if this is a monster. Meanwhile, Ichiro intercepts the girl from their hands and gently picks her up. Next, he knocks out two men with quick blows to the neck, and they fall unconscious to the ground together. After a while, he ties their hands and feet, leaning the bandits against the trunk of a large tree. The main character thinks that they should be handed over to the guards in the city. Ichiro puts an unknown girl on his back and turns her head to the side. He thinks it's wrong to leave her here because it looks like she's some kind of noble family. Suddenly, the guy wonders if she will accuse him of kidnapping. Suddenly, after some time ahead, the main character is surprised to find another carriage on the road. After looking a little closer, he discovers that she is surrounded by goblins. There is a young girl inside the carriage. She presses her hands to her head, cries, and in horror asks someone to save her, turning to nowhere. Suddenly, she hears a strange scream. Ichiro runs to her aid and shouts that he will figure it out. He knocks on the girl's window and, with concern in his voice, asks her if she is injured. The girl stutters a little and says she is not injured. The guy asks to open the door for him, but she doubts and asks who he is. After she opens the door for him, The young man casually explains to her that he's just a traveler who passed by and decided to help her. The girl is surprised to say that he is very strong. Suddenly, the main character turns to a new friend with a request and says that she is strange. Ichiro asks the girl to take the lady he recently rescued to a safe place. When they put the girl in the carriage, she wonders who she is. The guy explains to her that he saved her from kidnappers and asks if she is going to the city. She responds positively, and the guy thanks her with sincerity in his voice. A young girl bows in front of a guy and, a little shy, thanks him for his help. She offers to repay him with something, but he refuses and goes on his way. That's how the girl was saved. After a while, the main character again meets representatives of the fair sex on his way. He stands up for other people again and attacks the monster. Ichiro turns to the girls and shouts at them to leave the orc on him. Girls wearing armor say they can fight too. However, the main character says without a doubt in his voice that he can handle it himself. The guy urges the girl to run away as soon as possible. Those with tears in their eyes leave the main character alone with the monsters. One of them shouts that they will bring help. The main character sarcastically apologizes to one of the monsters and says that he needs to train a spatial strike. Ichiro attacks the big monster without a doubt. Rage can be seen on his face as he strikes one blow after another with a battle cry, preventing the orc from moving away from the previous blow. The main character is concentrating on the fact that he needs to put energy into his fist and charges the attack on the monster with all his might, after which the orc falls unconscious to the ground not far from him. After a while, the main character walks along the road, and with disappointment in himself thinks that the blow turned out to be strong, but it was not as strong as the hay. Suddenly, he looks in front of him and opens his eyes in surprise. The guy notices that the number of passers-by has increased and makes the assumption that the city is already close. There are many people and a lonely bridge in front of him. Ichiro pulls the hood over his head more tightly, hiding his face from outsiders. The guy reminds himself that he does not need to shine, since he is wanted. It's been about 3 months since he broke up with the hero group and started living with Senna. The main character turns his head up with a sad face and thinks that only a few months have passed. He can't believe he's met other people again. He remembers with some excitement that he has not been to the city for a long time. The main character opens his mouth in surprise when the huge southern border town of Balduff appears in front of him. The guy is surprised that this is the city he was looking for. He is much more than Ichiro expected. This city is located on the southernmost border, which is why it is called the Border City. There are walls around the city and the castle, which also play the role of border protection. They protect the city from the attacks of monsters. The main character notices the strangeness in the fact that the guards did not even pay attention to his face, although he is glad that nothing happened. Ichiro, a little perplexed, walks into the depths of the city and thinks that he first needs to find a guide. Suddenly, there is a boy in front of him. The main character turns to him and asks if he can ask him a question. The guy with the displeased face tells him that he can answer, but asks if he has money. A boy with a dissatisfied expression addresses the main character as an old man and says that he looks like a beggar. He folds his arms over his chest and says he can help, but not for free. Ichiro is madly amazed by the boy's words. Most of all, he found himself at a loss because of the boy's appeal to him. He is surprised that he was called an old man because he only recently turned 20 years old. Meanwhile, the boy looks at him doubtfully and asks if he is listening. The main character takes out a bag full of gold. There is a malicious grin on his face. The boy looks at him in surprise and stutters a little because of it. The main character immediately opens a bag filled to the top with gold coins and puts his hand into it. Ichiro positively answers the question that was not asked to him and tells the boy that he understood everything correctly. The little extortionist looks at the main character in amazement. His eyes are clouded by greed, and he sees only a huge amount of gold coins in front of him. The main character takes out a pair of gold coins from a bag of gold and shows them to the boy. Ichiro grins maliciously and arrogantly says that he is very rich. The boy immediately changes his attitude towards the main character and calls him an old man again, but with a different intonation. The young man stops him and asks the boy why he calls him an old man. He does not understand what is wrong with his treatment, but Ichiro explains to the boy that he is only 20. The guy suggests that calling him an old man is a bit wrong. A creepy aura emanates from the main character. Suddenly, the boy touches his hat with his hand and apparently is going to take it off. He sincerely apologizes to the main character for his rudeness. As soon as he takes off his headdress, the main character realizes that the young man posing as a young man has long, beautiful hair. He exclaims in surprise. The main character is amazed to himself that this girl, a new acquaintance of the young man, looks at him with a little embarrassment and confusion in her eyes, continuing to hold her hat in her hands. The girl again addresses him inappropriately, but this time she calls the main character uncle, which no less affects his self-esteem, causing him anger. After a while, the new acquaintance of the main character turns her head to him and finally addresses him properly, calling him brother. She asks Ichiro if he can walk faster. The main character, who is trailing behind a young girl with a dissatisfied look, answers her question in the negative and says that she is walking too fast. She looks back at him with displeasure but remains silent. Ichiro calls the girl a baby and explains to her that it's his first time in the city, so he would like to look around a little. The main character reminds her that he paid the girl to show him everything. He wonders why they're in a hurry. The girl looks away dissatisfied and frowns. She asks the main character to stop calling her baby and says she has a name. His companion introduces herself as Miran. The main character turns in her direction and with an awkward smile on his face, asks her for forgiveness. Ichiro compliments her and says that her name is very beautiful. The girl puts her finger to her face and says with a smile that she likes it too. After that, the girl shows the guy the whole city. She introduces him to the market and tells him that you can find almost anything he wants here. The main character looks at the crowded streets with surprise. He is stunned by so many people and assumes that his surprise is caused by the fact that he has been living in seclusion all this time. Ichiro examines the passers-by who are going about their business and with a slight embarrassment on his face, notices that it is very lively here. The girl turns her head in his direction, and with a smile on her face they ask him if he is surprised. She explains to him that this is the largest market in the city. The guy smiles back at her. He continues to look around, studying the city and the market in particular. The main character argues that everyone here lives their own lives and does everything to survive. He notices flour, spices, and many other different jars of food on the shelves. Suddenly, one of these jars attracts his attention. He picks it up and says it looks like natman. The guy notices that there are a lot of things here that look like things from his world. He decides to make a purchase and points his finger at a pair of glass jars, telling the seller that he wants to buy it. The salesman, who turns out to be an older man with a smile on his face, says he has experience in this. He explains to the young man that these are seasonings that spread the hero from another world. Ichiro understands why they seemed familiar to him. After a while, after walking around the market, he returns to the girl and reflects that, probably, even he will be able to survive in this world. Ichiro agrees to do anything to avoid meeting the heroes. The young companion of the main character asks him if he has finished shopping. Ichiro answers her question in the negative, and says he needs a little more time. Suddenly, he raises his head up and looks at the sky with apathy. The main character wonders if he will be able to return to his world at all. After a while, only after seeing dried fruits, nuts, and fruits from his world, he had already bought them. They probably got them as a reward for completing the dungeon. The main character argues that he sees no other explanation. Miran looks at him with a displeased face, frowning slightly. The girl thinks he bought too much. Ichiro apologizes to her for keeping her waiting and says he's almost done. Miran lowers his head down, covering his eyes with his hat, and is silent. The next moment, a slight blush appears on the girl's face, and she looks away. Miran, a little shy, says that it's not difficult for her to wait because he paid her as much as 4 gold pieces. After a couple of moments, the girl realizes that the main character is not listening to her. Ichiro has moved away from her and is already buying another product from the seller. Miran, with anger in her voice, asks him if he listens to her. She wonders why he needs so much food. Suddenly, she comes closer to him and exclaims loudly, asking him if he has found a place to stay for the night. The main character also thinks about it, but is interrupted by Miran. She offers him to stay with her. The guy asks the girl if he really can stay with her for the night, to which she enthusiastically says that her mother and sister will also be happy. Ichiro does not resist and does not refuse, arguing that she herself offered it to him. The girl exclaims joyfully. She has a joyfully smile on her face. At this moment, he was too excited. Miran reflects on the way home that she has not met such people for a long time. She thinks that he bought a lot of different things, and wants to make sure what kind of person he is. Suddenly, the girl turns to him and says that he has spent more than 100 gold pieces today. The guy himself is surprised by this large figure and asks her if he really spent so much. The girl looks at him in disbelief and is surprised that he did not notice it himself. Miran is asked by him how he was able to earn so much money. The guy answers her with a question and asks if she will believe him if he says that he is just a rich nobleman. The girl looks at him in disbelief and says she wouldn't believe it. She explains that he looks more like a beggar in his clothes, as he's dressed in complete junk. She also mentions that he has lifeless eyes. For the main character, Miran's words are echoed with pain in his heart. The guy asks if this is true, to which the girl interrupts him. She turns to him with a smile on her face and says that he is not repulsive to her like other nobles. Ichiro notes the similarities between Miran and his sister. It makes him smile. The girl does not want to end their conversation and asks him how he earned so much. The main character tells her the truth and tells her that he was an adventurer, to which he receives a violent reaction. Miran exclaims in surprise. The girl blushes a little and excitedly says that it's cool. She informs him that this is the first time she has seen an adventurer up close. Ichiro will do everything for you, asks the girl if she likes adventurers. She enthusiastically throws her arms out to the sides and answers his question positively. Her face is full of interest and curiosity. She says she has always dreamed of becoming an adventurer. The main character is surprised by this and asks if it is true. The girl answers him that when she grows up, she will definitely become an adventurer. She also holds on to her innermost dream and says that in truth, she has always dreamed of becoming a hero. The main character immediately changes his face. He looks at her in surprise and asks again about the hero. The girl enthusiastically clenches her hands into fists, and with a smile on her face says that all the children in the city admire the hero Luguin. The main character is surprised that she admires this hero and looks at her in disbelief. Ichiro asks the girl what she means, but the question remains unanswered. After a short period of time, Miran introduces his small house to a new friend, spreading his arms wide. She says that they are in place and that this is her home. The girl screams with joy on her face, addressing her mother that she is back. Ichiro is a little confused by this. The woman, on the other hand, rejoices at her return. Little sister Miran next to the woman supports her. Suddenly, she grabs her face with her hand and looks in surprise at the young man standing in front of her. She exclaims loudly and wonders who it is. The girl explains to her mother that this is her client, and Ichiro, with a little awkwardness, greets his mother to his conductor. He also does not forget about her younger sister, who hides behind Miran's back instead of returning the greeting. The main character asks her family for forgiveness for the intrusion and introduces himself with a fictitious name. The guy points at himself and calls himself Yamada. The woman asks him again in disbelief, and the girl notices that this is a very strange name. Ichiro laughs a little awkwardly and asks the girls to just call him Ro. About himself, the main character asks himself what he is saying. Miran tells his mother with delight in his voice that Ro is an adventurer and mentions how kind he was to her. The girl asks the woman if he can stay with them overnight. She responds positively and says she doesn't mind. The woman turns towards the young man and with a smile on her face says that her daughter liked him very much, so she asks him not to be shy and feel at home. This woman is Miran's mother. Her name is Marlo. She comes from a noble family, however. When she decided to get married, she simply rejected her. A few years ago, her husband passed away, and she had to take care of two beautiful daughters alone. After a while, the main character runs the kitchen of the Miran family. The woman behind his back changes in front of him and says that the boss should not cook the food himself. The guy calms her down and says that this is the least he can repay. Miran, not far from Ichiro, explains to her younger sister that Ichiro is a kind guy, and she thinks everything will be fine. Little Feel asks her older sister if Ro is really a good person. Ichiro himself is perplexed by this. Suddenly, the main character's guide through the city hears the sound of a blow behind her back. This makes the girl turn around. She sees her mother falling from a chair in front of her and exclaims loudly. The main character turns to the girl and wonders what the problem is. He assumes that her mom has leg problems. The guy sees Miran's tear-stained face. A girl with a frowning face tells him that her mother injured her legs when she got under the carriage of an aristocrat. The girl's very angry and shouts loudly that they pretended that nothing happened and just left. The main character talks about the fact that Marlo and Miran earn money in this family. Let it be a little, but they live a happy life. Because of Marlo's injury, their lives are about to collapse. The guy looks at her with concern and asks the woman if she can ask her parents for help. She explains to the main character that when she got married, she was cut out of the family. The guy keeps thinking that wounds can be cured with simple potions, but they won't help with fractures. He thinks that Marlo needs strong healing magic right now. Suddenly, the guy says that if she doesn't mind, he can treat her. The girl looks at him in surprise and wonders in amazement if he will be able to cure her mother. Ichiro explains to her that he is not a healer, but he understands something about it. Now that he can feel the energy, he can perform more subtle operations. However, he immediately notifies the woman that his method does not bypass itself for severe pain, so he wants to warn about it in advance. The woman interrupts his speech and asks him to understand her. She says she would do anything to stay with her girls. Miran looks anxiously in their direction, holding her little sister by the shoulders. The woman says that she has only one answer. Marlo looks at the main character with a determined look. Her brows furrow a little, and her face expresses pure severity when she addresses Ichiro. The woman tells him that he can proceed. Miran looks hopefully at the main character and asks him if he can cure their mother. He smiles at the girl and responds positively. The guy asks him to wait in another room. He remembers that Senna gave him some painkillers on the way. The main character never thought that he would use his abilities in this way, but he had no doubt. Marlo is lying exhausted on the bed in front of him. The woman is breathing heavily, and sweat is rolling down her face. Ichiro notifies her that they are done. The guy says she needs peace now. Exhausted by the long operation, the woman agrees with him and sincerely thanks him. After a moment, she thanks him again and tries to convince him of the truthfulness of her sincerity. Suddenly, little Miran bursts into the room. A girl with a tense face slaps her hands on the table and asks how her mom is doing. Next to her lies a sleeping full name. The main character quietly closes the door to the room and explains to her that she doesn't have to worry about the wound anymore. The girl exhales with relief and is glad that this is great news. The guy says that she will need to be given potions for a few days. He leaves about 6 potions in beautiful jars on a small table. Miran, a little embarrassed, tells him that they don't have that much money. The main character says with a peaceful look that he is not helping them for money. He's been working for a long time and has hardly slept, so he wants to rest. He also remembers that he needs to remember to wash the tools. The girl behind him looks at the main character in amazement. Tears well up in her eyes and then roll down her cheeks. The guy asks her not to worry and just take these potions. Miran begins to wipe the moisture from his face with his hands and squats down. The girl does not know how to pay him for his kindness. Ichiro smiles in response to her tears and asks what she is talking about. The main character, with all tenderness and care, puts his hand on her head and strokes the girl's obedient hair. He offers her something. The guy wants her to help him in the future when she sees that someone is in trouble. Ichiro smiles at her sincerely and tells her that this is life. One day his grandfather told him that he had to live his life so that he would not regret anything later. He wonders what that could mean. Ichiro realized something just now. The main character remembers that his grandfather told him that he should not turn a blind eye to other people's problems, so this time he will do everything in his power. Ichiro turns to the girls with a displeased look and says that it's time for them to go to bed. Fio and her older sister look at the main character with a dissatisfied look. The guy explains to them that they can talk tomorrow, to which he receives a disapproving exclamation. The girls, with one voice and admiration in their eyes, ask the main character to tell them about his adventures. The guy asks them if they promise that they will go to bed as soon as he tells them what they are asking for. Those with a smile on their face agree to his terms. The main character asks the 2 girls what they want to listen to. Miran excitedly raises his hand up and loudly demands a story about the boss of the maze. The guy agrees with them and says that in this case he will tell them the story of how he passed the maze, and after that they will go to sleep. The girls cheerfully exclaim and agree with him. The main character begins his story and tells them that one day he met a monster in the form of a blade. The guy remembers that she was glowing brightly and attacked them at a very high speed. It was a real challenge. Ichiro remembers the events of the past with horror and even notes that he cut off his hand. In confirmation of his words, he waves his hand from side to side. Then he says that there were two bosses in this maze. Little Theo looks at the main character with a startled look, admiring him. But Miran does not share her good mood and frowns. The guy says that a student helped him with the second boss and remembers the battle with the swordsman monster. The main character enthusiastically rises from his seat and says that in moments of desperation, his student was able to use a secret technique that cut the boss into pieces. Then she thought it was the end. Miran looks at him with a displeased look. Her brows furrow as she glares at him with disdain. The little name exclaims about how cool it is. The main character catches Miran's gaze and looks at her uncomprehendingly. After a while, Miran carefully puts his younger sister to bed and covers the child with a blanket. The girl turns to the main character with notes of disappointment, to which he looks at her questioningly. The girl says that she understands that she did not want to deceive them and told them everything just to surprise her full name. The main character looks at a new acquaintance in surprise and asks with confusion in his eyes what she's talking about. Miran asks him not to pretend and explains his words by saying that she has learned stories about the adventures of the hero Luguin. Ichiro looks back at her in amazement. Inwardly, the guy is surprised by her words. The girl says that she knows that this is so, and that all this happened to the hero. The guy tries to justify himself to her and asks her to wait. Ichiro explains to her that he was really there. Miran looks at him suspiciously and sarcastically wonders if it's a coincidence that their stories are similar to the hero. The guy hesitates a little and mumbles with embarrassment, not knowing what to answer her. In the end, the main character does not find the right words and just apologizes to the girl. He asks her if she could tell him about the great hero. Miran told him a lot, but it was very difficult for him to believe all this. He also went through 7 mazes in the group: the maze of mirrors, the maze of color, and the maze of blades. Then, alone, he cleared 4 more labyrinths: the labyrinth of power, the labyrinth of the undead, the labyrinth of ice, and the labyrinth of flame. The main character talks about the fact that everyone was told that it was the hero who cleared the dungeons. It is also well known how close Miki, Angie, and Alice are to the hero. Ichiro is very saddened by the way they have blackened his story. The guy remembers the story that Miran told him. The holy swordsman Yamada was just a fat, lazy man. He loved women and alcohol more than anything in the world, and the heroes always got in the way of doing their duty. In addition, they said that he was very arrogant and always behaved rudely to others. He always ran away from the battle and, running away, always shouted that he didn't care about others. Ichiro wonders what is going on and how far the hero has gone. The next morning comes. The sun rises from the horizon and illuminates the girl's room. Birds are chirping outside the window. Little Miran stretches sweetly and yawns. The girl slowly gets out of bed and rubs her eyes. The main character is surprised that it is already morning and looks out the window in amazement. He apologizes to her for delaying them and offers to cook them something delicious as an apology. The girl agrees with him and goes back to bed. She turns over and says that, come to think of it, he's already done a lot for them. Ichiro is a little shy, but agrees. An unexpected girl asks him to take them to the theater. She says she heard that there will be a play that the hero wrote himself. The main character looks at her in disbelief and thinks about it. Miran says with a smile on her face that her name is Conquering the Labyrinth of Blades. She shares with the main character that she really wants to watch it. Her younger sister is sleeping next to her. Ichiro looks at her a little in disbelief. The main character wonders about himself what is going on, but only out loud, stuttering a little from uncertainty. Agrees with Miran. The guy says that if she wants to see it so much, then he can take not only her, but also her full name, and Merlot too. Miran abruptly jumps out of bed and is surprised to be asked if this is true. The guy notices that she doesn't want to sleep anymore. After a while, they come to the theater and listen and watch the play. The guy looks at the stage with a frown on his face. The content of the play was exactly as Miran had told him. He thinks that he'd better leave this place as soon as possible. He changes his face and gets up from his seat. Miran looks at him in disbelief and calls him, addressing him as a brother. Unexpectedly for everyone, the main character apologizes to them. He turns to them and feigns joy on his face. The guy says that he remembered that urgent business awaits him. He needs to leave the city. Ichiro asks them to take care of themselves. After a while, he finds himself on a lonely bridge. The main character watches as the fish jumps up out of the water and descends there again. He thinks he has a lot to think about. Ichiro reflects that Ryuguin has fabricated their story of conquering a labyrinth. He believes that Mirin is just a child, and she couldn't have known. Perhaps it's better for residents not to know the real stories. Suddenly, he hears screams from the side. The main character turns around and sees two children on the opposite side, carelessly splashing in the water. He looks at them sadly and thinks that if you think about it, then everywhere they only talk about the adventures of the hero. The same goes for plays in the theater. Ryuguin personally prescribed the script in order to calmly continue his journey and pour mud on his name. Ichiro hurriedly leaves the bridge. Despite this, he is sure that high-ranking people know what he did, and they probably know all the atrocities of Ryuguin. The main character wonders why they are inactive. The guy remembers those who were next to him. They all took Ryuguin's side and gave the achievements to him, and he was slandered as the last scum. He gives up the reason for their actions. The main character remembers that they also used the magic of the laws, and even he could not help him. Ichiro looks at his hand with disappointment. The guy wonders if this is not enough, and argues that he did everything in his power. An inner voice urges him to simply admit that no one needs him and ask him for whom he is straining. The guy remembers his loved ones. A voice in his head tells him that this is the harsh truth of this world. So he asks the main character why he should put pressure on himself. He suggests simply returning to his home world. However, suddenly he remembers that very stone. Suddenly, Senna's hair appears in front of his eyes. Who calls the main character by name? Tears well up in Ichiro's eyes. He looks at nothing, but remembers that in his magic bag there are ingredients for the dish that she wanted to try. He thinks that will be enough. The main character quickly runs to the exit of the city and thinks that he wants to hear her voice again and wants to feel her warmth again. Ichiro realizes that he wants to see Senna as soon as possible. The image of a girl appears before his eyes. After a certain amount of time, the main character finally returns to Senna's house. It's already completely dark outside, but the girl is still waiting for him near the house. Her hair is blowing in the wind. The main character stops running for too long and rests his hands on his knees, trying to catch his breath due to too much stress. Through sighs, the guy says he's back. Suddenly, the girl comes up to him. Senna quickly leans against his chest and hugs the main character. This action of the girl causes their faces to be covered with a slight blush. She is very glad that he is back. Tears come to the girl's eyes. She looks up and asks the guy if he's okay. Ichiro speculates that when they first met, she seemed completely lifeless to him, but now she worries about him. He thinks that as long as they have each other, he cannot worry about the past, because now he likes their current relationship and, even knowing that he is an alien, she did not turn away from him. The main character thinks that because of this, now he will no longer hide anything from her. Ichiro's face changes, and he looks at her with a serious look. He says he wants to tell her something. The girl asks him again about his story and looks at him in surprise. The guy looks gloomy at the very thought of it, but after a moment, Senna smiles at him and says that they are ready to listen. Ichiro thinks that this is a very long story. He tells her everything that has happened to him since he was called into this world. The girl listens to him quietly and occasionally nods. After the story, she touches his face with her hand and praises him, calling him a good fellow. At the same moment, Senna pulls him to her and hugs him. There is a slight blush on her face. The girl smiles and says that he had to go through a lot, but he coped with it. She praises him for being kind to others and once again calls him a good boy. In response to her words, tears appear in the eyes of the main character. Senna continues her speech and says that many people are intoxicated by power, but not him. Senna emphasizes that she believes that the main character used all the power that he had for the sake of peace. The girl believes that not everyone is capable of such a thing. Ichiro hugs the girl in response, and tears silently roll down his cheeks. Senna believes that his reaction is normal, and asks him to cry on the contrary, because she believes that when it's hard for people, they need to let their emotions run wild. The girl thinks that people's hearts are a very fragile thing. The main character continues to hug his girlfriend with tears in his eyes. They sit on their knees. Senna, with a slight blush on her cheeks, whispers in the guy's ear that there is nothing wrong with that, and everything is fine. Ichiro looks at her sadly and is silent. In the end, the girl says that if he wants to tell her anything else, she will listen. The main character suddenly picks up a stone and hands it to the girl to show. She looks at the guy's find in surprise and wonders what it is. He explains to the girl that it is a wish stone. Ichiro tells her that he got it after going through the maze of blades. The events of the past appear before his eyes, which reflect the very labyrinth. The main character, with a small smile on his face, says that he feels that an amazing power is hidden in him. He squeezes the stone in his palm and says that he believes that he will be able to return to his world. Suddenly, the girl comes closer to him and leans forward a little. She addresses him by name and asks Ichiro if he is afraid of something, to which the eyes of the main character open wide in surprise. The young man admits to himself that he is really afraid, although he no longer remembers what exactly. A sudden girl touches his clenched fist with her palm and says that there is nothing terrible about it and everything is fine. The main character repeats her words to himself, that there is nothing wrong with that, and thinks that her words have always been his support, just like this time. The girl takes his hand in her two palms and says that he is free. Suddenly, she turns away and walks away from him. Senna says he has no reason to stay here anymore. The main character shyly looks down and remains silent, unable to find the right words. However, suddenly the girl says that in order for him to stay here and no reason is needed. His eyes widen, and he looks at his girlfriend with a surprised look. She leans her palms against her chest and says with a peaceful smile that this is his home and his family. He can always leave at any moment, but if he feels lonely, he can come back at any moment. The main character's face shows immense gratitude for the girl's words and her actions. He is ready to cry again because of her speech, but she continues and says that until he gets rid of his pain, he can stay here forever. Senna explains to him that until he loses his job, she will always be with him. The girl turns to him, and with a smile on her face says that's why he has nothing to worry about. Ichiro found it difficult to put into words everything he wanted to say. The young man thinks that she understands him and is ready to comfort him at any moment since their first meeting, so he is obliged to show her all his feelings. Ichiro abruptly walks up to her and grabs her by the shoulders. He expresses his desire to stay with her. The girl looks up at him with peace and a slight smile. Her face turns red again when the guy touches his palm to him. The young man pulls her in, and both of them are going to touch their lips to each other. But suddenly, he hears a noise. Suddenly, the girl's teacher turns out to be in front of Ichiro and Senna. A large bag is slung over her shoulder. She watches the young couple with a malicious smile and loudly exclaims that she has returned. The main character and the girl look at the woman who appeared out of nowhere in disbelief. There is a slight blush on both their faces due to the fact that they were interrupted at a long-awaited moment. After a certain amount of time, it was morning, and even afternoon outside. The main character methodically prepares something in the kitchen. In the end, he gets scrambled eggs and salad. He is relieved to say that breakfast is ready. Ichiro rolls up his shirt sleeves and says that now he needs to prepare the ingredients for lunch and dinner. There is tension on his face. Suddenly, the main character is called by name. There are two pretty girls in front of him. Senna folds her hands in a pleading gesture and informs him that she is hungry. The woman next to her agrees with the student and asks if breakfast is still ready. At the end of her appeal, the girl adds that he is her son-in-law. The main character repeats this word to himself and his face instantly and very much blushes. He looks at the woman in amazement, frowning. Ichiro exclaims loudly and asks her what she's saying at all. The girl explains to him that if he wants, she can call him that. The guy wonders if she even knows what it means, but then says she'll cook everything. Ichiro recalls that during this time that they spent together with Senna, they became very close, but this woman destroyed the pleasant atmosphere that prevailed here. The young man remembers the moment when they almost touched lips. The main character looks at the woman who is standing next to his girlfriend with tension in his eyes and frowns a little. Ichiro thinks that, if he is not mistaken, Senna called her a teacher. The women and the girl notice his gaze. Suddenly, a malicious smile spreads on the woman's face, and a slight blush appears on her face. She narrows her eyes and asks the guy, "What's the matter?" The woman asks him if he wants to see her body shape. He opens his eyes in surprise and holds out his hands in a conciliatory gesture. Very much embarrassed by her words, he loudly exclaims negatively and says that she is just wearing very beautiful kimonos. However, she stares at him intently. The woman comes closer to him and addresses him again as a son-in-law. The main character looks at her in disbelief. His face is already completely red from embarrassment. However, she does not stop and, with a smile on her face, pushes the kimono aside a little with her hand in the chest area. The woman now asks him with emphasis if only the kimono is beautiful. The main character watches her actions in amazement, and in order not to look at her forms, he covers his eyes with one hand. Senna is watching this picture with displeasure from behind the guy's back. However, a slight blush also appears on the woman's face. She frowns and watches as the guy tries to justify himself. Ichiro babbles something unintelligible, very shy. Suddenly, she starts laughing, and to hide her smile, she slightly covers her mouth with the edge of her kimono. The woman mockingly apologizes to him and says that he is cute when he is embarrassed, and she just decided to make a joke. He looks at her in surprise. The guy, whose face is completely covered in paint due to being too embarrassed by the situation, exhales heavily. The main character says that he is going to go cook more food. The woman hugs her student. Senna's teacher, like herself, eats an extraordinary amount. In the end, because of these spare supplies, there is only enough food for 1 month. The main character needs to go to the city again, but he still can't get Luguin out of his head. It wonders what is going on there. The guy thinks that since he can't come back, he has to know. Such thoughts do not leave him. However, this time, everything is tightly locked in his hand, and he wants to let his lover go to the city. A girl with a stern expression says that you can go to the city tomorrow. The main character looks down at her with a little sadness and apathy. He addresses her by name but falls silent because he has no other words. Suddenly, Senna's teacher comes up to him from the other side and also hubs his hand. The woman agrees with the girl and says that he can go tomorrow. Ichiro stands amazed on the spot, and Senna looks displeased. The woman again covers her mouth with a malicious smile with the corner of her kimono sleeve and laughs softly. She mockingly asks him what's the matter and calls him her son-in-law again. The guy blushes again and tries to pull away. The main character's scream is too loud. Because of this, it can be heard even outside the house. Ichiro exclaims that he told her to stop doing that, to which she says there's nothing wrong with it. In the end, the main character tells the girls that he is leaving. He also notifies them that breakfast is on the table. Already at the door, the young man turns to his friends and says that he has prepared food for the whole day. He asks them to warm it up and eat it. Ichiro also asks them not to walk too long, arguing that it is quite hot today. He says that he will most likely return tomorrow and asks the girls not to be bored. Senna puts his hands in the lock and sadly asks him to be careful. Her teacher arrives in a little perplexity and watches this with surprise and then turns her gaze to her student. She says she thinks he's overprotective of her. After a while, the main character finds himself back in the border town of Balduff, which is already familiar to him. A young guy walks down the street of a busy town. He wonders if Mirin is sitting in the same place. The girl turns out to be there too. Ichiro loudly distracts her by name, and only after that she turns her attention to an old acquaintance. The girl greets him with a smile on her face and asks the main character why he came to the city. The main character explains to her that he came here to buy supplies and gather information. Mirin looks at him in surprise and remembers that last time he bought a lot of food. Ichiro only smiles awkwardly in response. They are walking down the street of a busy city when the main character explains to him that something has happened, so you need to stock up. The girl urges him not to worry and not to rush like last time. Ichiro agrees with her and says that they will buy her something at the market as an apology. The girl closes her eyes a little shyly and reminds him that she told the guy not to worry. The main character asks the girl if she wants to eat with him. She says with anger in her voice that she did not mention such a thing. Ichiro calms her down and says there's nothing wrong with that. Mirin frowns in displeasure. After a while, a young man and a girl are sitting on one of the benches in the park in front of the fountain. Mirin eats a flatbread with a satisfied face. The girl closes her eyes with pleasure. The main character asks her not to rush so much. He also wants his guide to tell him what news is going on in the city. The girl chews her lunch in a hurry. After she chews her food, Mirin thinks about the main character's question and moments later remembers that they often discuss the hero's group now. Ichiro says with contempt in his eyes that this is not surprising. The girl picks up his words. not noticing the note of sadness and disappointment in his voice. She says with admiration in her eyes that this hero protects their world. Ichiro rhetorically asks her about the latter. To himself, the main character wonders if he was able to make any progress at all. Ichiro exhales heavily and asks the girl to tell him a little more, to which she agrees without question. Miran, with a tense expression on her face and slightly frowning eyebrows, tells him that she heard that recently the heroes group went to the Labyrinth of Time, and they had a very difficult time. The main character looks at the girl in amazement, slightly opening his mouth in surprise when she says that, according to rumors, the heroes group did not even manage to clean up the first floor. The guy asks if she is sure of this, and Miran, with a confident expression on her face, answers his question positively and explains to him that these are not just rumors. The girl also remembers that this is not all. She frowns and says with tension in her voice that apparently there are as many as 12 bosses in this maze. The main character cannot even imagine how it is possible to clean up such a place. He opens his mouth in surprise and wonders if they're all attacking at the same time. However, the girl answers his question in the negative and says that there are 12 floors in the maze and each has its own boss. Ichiro is surprised that a group of 4 people couldn't even handle the first one. Miran mentions that 12 of the best rank seekers went with the hero. The girl explains to him that they are called the saviors of the arcana. Ichiro calls this nonsense and is surprised that even with such a squad they could not cope. Miran spreads her arms to the sides in disbelief and covers one eye. The girl makes the assumption that this maze is incredibly difficult. She believes that it is because of this hero that he called this maze the Devil's Labyrinth. The main character, surprised, asks her again about the name that the heroes gave to this maze, to which he receives a positive response from the girl. She says that the bosses there manipulate time and cannot be defeated in the usual way. The main character thinks that time management is a divine force. Apparently, he thought that evil forces had touched God's forces, and that's why he decided that it was the devil. The main character thinks that nothing has changed. Luguin failed and decided to give up this venture. The maze turned out to be too complicated, and he simply referred to the powers of the devils. Ichiro lowers his head down in disdain. The guy thinks that one day at least someone will see his cowardly nature. Suddenly, the girl gets up from her seat. She wonders if she could help him. Ichiro responds positively and thanks her with sincerity in his voice. Miran asks his friend if he has any other plans and offers to accompany him. In this case, the main character decides not to refuse and asks her to take him to the Adventurers Guild. She exclaims in surprise. The girl, despite her surprise, concludes that he is still an adventurer. She thinks it's cool. The main character rubs his nose with his finger and smiles arrogantly. He is surprised to himself that she did not even suspect this. After a short period of time, Miran leads the main character to the beautiful building of the Guild of Adventurers of the Kingdom of Arakan. Ichiro opens the front door and looks around the room. The main character and the girl enter the building. They are faced with a lot of tables and people who are sitting at them. Suddenly, they hear an adventurer and an adventurer talking. The man speaks loudly and the girl asks him to stop. The man asks the girl what he said wrong. She tries to calm him down and asks him to stop it. Miran carefully backs away along the wall of the room and tells the main character not to look at them. He agrees with her, watching the painting in disbelief. Ichiro carefully watches the dialogue between the two adventurers. The man says that they themselves heard that the heroes group went with the best adventurers into the maze, but did not pass even one floor. Marin urges Ichiro to move on. The man says that this maze is no higher than A rank and wonders why they lost. He doesn't understand how the kingdom's strongest group managed to lose. Ichiro gestures with his hands to Miran to keep quiet. They sit down at a table not far from the chatting couple. The man also mentions that there was also a famous swordswoman with them. The main character repeats his words to himself and assumes that they are talking about Eris. The girl says she's heard about it too. The man asks her if this is true and tells her what she has heard, that she defended her allies to the end. She agrees with her friend. A man with discontent in his voice wonders what the problem was then and why even such a knight could not cope with the boss. Ichiro agrees with the adventurers unknown to him. He believes that Eris shouldn't have had any difficulty defeating the boss. The girl is disappointed to assume that the rumors about her were just lies. She says that everyone thought she was very strong. They also say that Eris tried her best but was unable to use the holy sword. An image of a girl they were familiar with pops up in the head of the main character. The man says he heard that her nose even bled when she tried to pull out the sword, but in the end she did not use it at all. The girl asks him to stop saying it and thinks it's a lie because she can't be that weak. The man believes that there is definitely something wrong with her and suggests that it may be some kind of curse. The girl agrees with him and assumes that the Holy Knight Yamada is to blame for everything. The main character chokes on these words, indignant, to himself. The adventurer says that there were rumors that he was an evil sorcerer. The girl refutes these words of a friend. The main character agrees with her and exclaims to himself that everything is wrong. Ichiro, with an evil smile on his face, tries to contain his emotions. He hears people talking about how they saw him using the holy sword in the port city. Muran wipes the water off the guy's face with a displeased expression. The man says he saw it too. He also casually mentions that he was called the Hero's Knight. The girl puts her hand to her face and repeats his words. Suddenly she exclaims, thereby showing that she remembered about it. In another part of the country, a ship docks in the port city of Lemon, from which a beautiful young girl, Ophelia Barita, comes ashore. She greets the bustling city that appears before her with a smile on her face. Ophelia is secretly glad that she has finally arrived and will be able to find the swordswoman Eris in this city. Suddenly, she hears some sounds from the side. The girl turns back in disbelief and looks in surprise in the opposite direction. Ophelia exclaims loudly and wonders what kind of screams they are. Suddenly, she sees Eris running after the hero and calling him master, imploringly asking him to train with her. The guy says with disdain that she is a good girl. He had already told her that he thought it was all useless. Luguin turns to her and adjusts his hair with an arrogant smile. He says that he doesn't have time to study with her, and mentions that he is a great hero who will save this world. Ophelia watches this picture in disbelief and is surprised to herself that this man is a hero. She cannot believe it and watches as Eris falls to her knees in tears and asks her master why he rejects her. She opens her eyes wide and watches this picture in disbelief. The girl looks at the tearful swordswoman with disappointment in her eyes. Ophelia can't believe that this is Eris Gladius. She hardly sees her as the girl she has admired all her life. Ophelia realizes with disappointment in her heart that there is absolutely nothing left of her former greatness. The girl remembers the events of the past. At one of the training sessions, her teacher announces to her that they have finished today. Eris, with a smile on his face and sincerity in his voice, thank him for the lesson. The girl watches this from the side in disbelief. She didn't believe it at first, but then she personally witnessed how she trained with her teacher for almost 17 hours. The main character, whose face Ophelia cannot remember, answers the girl with a smile on his face. It says it's glad because it was able to help her and thank her in return too. Suddenly, a crazy guess appears in Ophelia's head. The girl thinks about the fact that Eris called that man master. She remembers that he definitely had black hair, and he wasn't that tall. She also clearly remembers that his soul exuded a very warm kindness. She compares this kindness to the darkness in the soul of this hero. The image of the evil Luguin rises in front of her. The girl does not understand what is happening and puts her hand to her head to calm down a little. She makes an assumption to herself that she could have been mistaken, but immediately corrects herself and says that he definitely had black hair. The girl thinks she needs to calm down. She saw one that she would never forget, and most importantly, the holy swordswoman herself accepted him as her teacher. She's been through a lot and achieved incredible strength, and that's why she wants to cross her sword with him.